Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Elizabeth Espino Vasquez. Elizabeth Vasquez Marin was born in a city located in the Cajamarca department of Peru. Her parents were 6 children. The parents loved them all dearly and worked incredibly hard to raise their children in prosperity. Elizabeth's childhood was happy and cheerful, as is often the case in a family with many children. She got along well with her 5 siblings. During her university studies, Elizabeth met a young man, Alejandro Espino, whom she married in 1987. A year later, they had their first and only daughter, whom they named Elizabeth Espino Vasquez, affectionately called Elita by everyone. By that time, both Elita's parents were balancing family life with their careers. Elizabeth began to develop her career as a lawyer, studying 2 majors simultaneously at university in Lima, while her husband was also working toward his career as a lawyer. Years later, his career advancement led him to the position of prosecutor in the fight against corruption. The hectic pace of life left them with almost no time to care for their little girl, who, during the first 4 years of her life, was raised by her grandparents on her mother's side. They provided her with the love that her parents could not, and additionally, Elita's grandparents' youngest daughter was Elita's age, allowing them to grow up like sisters. Every birthday of Elita's was celebrated like a grand holiday and served as a wonderful reason for the whole family to gather. At every family event, Elita was always by her aunt's side. The 2 girls constantly played pranks together and were never scolded. Instead, they were spoiled and had their wishes fulfilled, which led to them being jokingly labeled as spoiled. When Elita turned 4, her parents decided, in her best interests, to move to the Lima department since it was time for her to start kindergarten and they wanted her to have access to quality education from an early age. Moreover, moving to the capital afforded Elita other privileges. To make up for the time she could not spend with her only daughter, her mother showered Elita with various gifts, leading her to live like a queen. She had the best toys, designer clothes, trips abroad, and a top-notch education. Additionally, Maureen indulged all her whims. Despite this, the little girl often felt out of place, unable to rely on her mother's company, who was busy managing several businesses. Nevertheless, Maureen tried to spend all her free time with Elita. Eventually, they grew so close that they resembled best friends. Unfortunately, this closeness vanished without a trace when Elita reached her teenage years. In an instant, she transformed into a problematic teen, and the first warning sign was her plummeting school performance, despite having always been the best student. Shortly thereafter, constant quarrels with her mother ensued. Elita's resentment began to fester because everyone around her admired her mother, specifically, her mother's success at work, beauty, and gentle demeanor. Elita did not possess the same physical attributes as her mother, which consumed her with strong jealousy. At every opportunity, she would question why she looked so different from her mother. In an attempt to reconnect with her daughter, Elizabeth continued to indulge her desires and shower her with gifts. Among these requests were plastic surgeries and other measures aimed at enhancing Elita's beauty. Elizabeth supported and financed these efforts in hopes that Elita's confidence and self-esteem would improve, but the girl remained unsatisfied. Her hatred for her mother only deepened. Elizabeth and Alejandro's divorce in 2007 only exacerbated the situation. Elita blamed her mother for it all, and her resentment intensified. Around the same time, Elita began dating a young man named Fernando Gonzalez Asenjo, whom she met at a Mormon church in the San Isidro area. Few people knew that Fernando attended the church solely to exploit unsuspecting young believers with considerable money. His scheme was simple. He would tell wealthy young women that his family was very poor, that he lived alone with his mother, and that his father had abandoned the family when he was just a small boy. By pretending to be a good son, a victim, he evoked pity from the girls and gained their affection. Elita was no exception. In reality, Fernando was a problematic individual. He had no job, didn't even try to study, wanted an easy life. Fernando understood that Elita would easily succumb to manipulation and would support him, while Elita did not realize that Fernando was simply using her. When Elizabeth found out that her daughter was dating a young man from the church, she was happy because she thought he was a hardworking and good boy. Additionally, when Alida talked about the difficulties that Fernando had allegedly faced, Elizabeth decided to help him get his life on track. She rented him an inexpensive apartment so that he could live away from his mother and paid for his schooling, during which he was supposed to study business so that later, Maureen could offer him a job in one of her companies. However, Fernando did not take advantage of this opportunity and attended only 2 classes. When Elizabeth learned about this, she was very upset. Understanding that Fernando was dear to her daughter, she decided to give him another chance and offered him a job as a manager's assistant. Fernando missed that opportunity as well. He was fired after losing a check for a substantial amount of money, even though he was simply supposed to deliver it from one place to another. Furthermore, Fernando did not pay Elizabeth rent for the apartment, despite their agreement that she would let him live there for a minimum price, not for free. This behavior convinced Elizabeth that he was with Alida only for her money. She forbade her daughter from continuing the relationship, thinking she could break them apart. Maureen decided to send Alida to the United States for a vacation at her younger sister's house, with whom Alida had been very close in childhood. This decision turned out to be perfect. She hoped her daughter could meet other boys and forget about Fernando. Ultimately, this plan did not work, and the couple continued their long-distance relationship. Just a couple of months later, Alida returned to Lima to start studying at the law school of the Peruvian University of Applied Sciences. At the same time, Fernando moved to another apartment and began living alone, but he was able to afford this not because he found a job, but because Alida was paying all his bills. She received this money from her mother, who gave her about $450 a month for her university expenses. This amount, of course, was not enough for the lavish lifestyle Fernando hoped for. Therefore, to please her boyfriend, Alida snuck into her mother's room and stole her wallet. Elizabeth soon noticed the missing money, which led to a fierce argument between mother and daughter. Alida denied taking the money, but by that time, Elizabeth suspected that her daughter was still seeing Fernando, and the situation with the money helped confirm this. Intending to find out the truth, Elizabeth checked her daughter's computer. She found her correspondence with Fernando. In the messages, she also saw that Fernando was demanding rent payments, meals from expensive restaurants, and branded clothing from Alida. This situation was the last straw for Elizabeth. In turn, Alida interpreted this as a declaration of war. By July 2009, Elizabeth reduced the amount of money she gave her daughter for expenses and began to keep track of every penny she spent. Of course, all of this drove Alida to despair, as she could no longer indulge her boyfriend's desires. Alida's dissatisfaction grew. She wanted money, power, and freedom. She planned to achieve this at any cost, even ignoring the fact that Elizabeth was doing all of this for her sake. It was then that Alida decided to cross all boundaries and began to devise a plan to get rid of her own mother. Alida's plan was to inherit her mother's fortune, which was estimated at $4 million at that time. Additionally, Elizabeth had investments in the insurance market, owned several companies, and had several insurance policies, which Alida did not suspect. Little did she know that her mother was one step ahead in her efforts to protect her daughter from Fernando. She had rewritten her will, and in the event of her death, all her assets would go to Elizabeth's father, who would be obliged to take care of Alida. As if foreseeing what was about to happen, Elizabeth met with her parents, brothers, and sisters to inform them of her decision. She told them she was doing this for Alida, because she feared for her safety and her daughter's safety, having realized that Fernando was an unreliable person capable of causing harm for his own desires. Unfortunately, Maureen was not mistaken. While Elizabeth was doing everything possible for Alida's well-being, she was unhappy that Elizabeth did not accept her relationship with Fernando, and that Elizabeth had taken away some privileges. Alida planned to stage a kidnapping to escape with her boyfriend and use the money obtained to gain the freedom she so desperately wanted. Greed, envy, beauty, constant quarrels, the thirst for money, and Fernando's bad influence led Alida to devise a plan to murder her mother. enlisting the help of her boyfriend Fernando and a friend of Fernando's named Jorge Cornejo Ruiz, who was 22 years old, to help them commit the crime that was to take place on the night of January 26, 2010. On that day, Elida went to work with Elizabeth and asked her for about $3 supposedly to print some university assignments. In fact, she spent that money to take a taxi home, let Fernando and his friend into their house. The guys hid in Elizabeth's room and were to wait for her return from work. Elida told them that when Elizabeth entered the room, they should immediately strangle Elizabeth as they had previously agreed. After talking to her accomplices, Elida returned to work with Elizabeth. Eventually, Elida and Elizabeth returned home around 10:30 p.m. Elida deliberately made a small noise so that Fernando and Jorge could hear. Unsuspecting, Elizabeth went up to her room and turned on the light. At that moment, Fernando, standing behind her, began to strangle Elizabeth while his accomplice Jorge held Elizabeth by her legs. Elizabeth managed to break free for a moment and resist, but Fernando quickly regained his footing, subdued her. When it was over, Elida went to the kitchen where the 19-year-old maid, Maria Liliana Huaman Chucolin, was at the time. She ordered Maria to go to her room and lock herself in there. After that, Elida returned to Elizabeth's room. While Fernando and Jorge held her down, Elida lunged at Elizabeth, began demanding money from her, forcing her to give the password to the accounts or hand over the safe's key. Until that moment, Elizabeth thought that Fernando was acting alone to take revenge on her, but upon seeing that her daughter was involved in the attack, she gathered her strength to lunge at Elida. Elizabeth managed to grab Elida by her arms and scratch her chest. When the fight was almost over, Elizabeth kicked her daughter several times in the legs. This last act enraged Elida, after which she struck her mother severely, pressed a pillow to her face to suffocate her. When Elizabeth stopped breathing, the criminals proceeded with their plan. Fernando and Jorge took the body, moved it to the trunk of Elizabeth's car. Meanwhile, Elida went to distract the guard. She talked to him and asked him to go to the pharmacy to buy some medicine. Thus, they managed to remove the body. They planned to hide it and the car to stage everything as if it were a kidnapping. The screams and sounds of the struggle were heard by the maid, which scared her greatly, but she could do nothing to help Elizabeth as Elida had locked her in and she had no way to escape the room on her own. Early in the morning at 5 a.m., Maria woke up and made orange juice for Elizabeth as she always did. At that time, Elida appeared and told her to drink the juice because her mother had already gone to work. After that, she went to her mother's workplace, where Elizabeth's accountant was already present. Elida told her that the criminals had contacted her and claimed that Elizabeth had been kidnapped. Elizabeth's accountant immediately blocked all of her boss's bank accounts to prevent the criminals from carrying out bank transfers. Jessica also noticed that Elida looked worried, that there were bruises on her arms and legs, but she did not pay much attention to it as at that moment she was only thinking about Elizabeth. She immediately reported the kidnapping to law enforcement while Elida called her relatives to tell them what had happened. When she returned to the office, she was shocked by the state of her workspace. There was chaos everywhere and many documents were scattered across the desk. At that moment, she did not notice that several important documents, including a will that Elizabeth claimed had been made a few months earlier, were missing. This will then caused a legal dispute between her relatives. While the police began investigating the disappearance from the tourist area, a horrifying message came in. An abandoned car had been found with a lifeless body inside. The body was taken to the morgue, where forensic experts conducted analyses and immediately established the cause of death as suffocation, discovering traces of violence on various parts of her body. The news of Elizabeth's death shocked her family and those around her. Everyone who knew and loved her could not believe that such a hardworking, kind woman could have been killed in such a terrible way. At the funeral, Elida appeared to be grief-stricken and inconsolable. In the following days, she displayed only cold behavior and a vacant gaze, as though she were not at all affected by her mother's death. Furthermore, she provided nonsensical explanations for what had happened that day. Her grandmother and grandfather felt that they no longer knew the girl they had raised, loved so much in her childhood. The investigation began by examining threats that Elizabeth's ex-husband had received a few months prior. He was a talented lawyer and at that time worked as a prosecutor fighting corruption. Investigators speculated that a possible reason for the disappearance could have been his significant role in the arrest of the mafia and a well-known banned substance dealer. He had powerful enemies, and their involvement seemed obvious, but the investigation in that direction led nowhere. The detectives assigned to the case then decided to focus on a person who could have been the organizer of the crime. By that time, enough evidence and conflicting witness statements had been gathered, indicating that the perpetrator could have been Alida, Elizabeth's only daughter. Despite her display of mourning at the funeral, the police had lingering suspicions, as during the interrogations, Alida provided contradictory stories. During her first interrogation, she stated that she had come home late in the evening and immediately gone to her room to study. At 2 a.m., she realized she was hungry and went down to the kitchen. When she returned, the door to her mother's room was locked, but the light was still on inside. Alida recounted that her mother had left for work early on the morning of January 27th, after which she received a call from the criminals informing her that her mother had been taken hostage and that they would release her in exchange for a ransom. Detectives managed to establish that this call never occurred. Instead, they discovered that on that day, Alida had made numerous calls to Fernando. Following this finding, they became the primary suspects in the case. When Alida was called back for questioning, she claimed that she had never argued with her mother, a statement confirmed by her father, who at the time was already a district judge and the chairman of the Supreme Court of Amazonas. He stated that their family was very close, even despite the divorce, and insisted that the reason for Elizabeth's death was revenge from her enemies, although this version had already been dismissed by authorities. Additionally, there was other evidence against Alida and Fernando. Although the criminals had wiped the fingerprints, a luminol test revealed that Elizabeth's blood had been found throughout the house. A crucial element in the investigation was the testimony of the maid, who described that terrible night, noting that she heard Elizabeth's cries for help but could not assist her because Alida had locked her in. She added that in the morning, she performed her household duties, but Alida came and said that her mother had already left for work. There is also the testimony of the guard. Later, Elizabeth's best friend testified that mother and daughter often had intense arguments, and sometimes Alida even attacked her mother. Considering all the gathered evidence and testimonies, on February 9th, the Homicide Investigation Department of the National Police of Peru appealed to the on-duty judge for the preliminary arrest of 3 suspects in this crime. Alida was arrested around noon. Just a couple of hours later, her accomplices, Fernando and Jorge, were also apprehended. During Alida's arrest, she was accompanied by her father, Alejandro Espino, and 2 defense attorneys. After Alida was placed in custody, she underwent a forensic examination, during which it was determined that she had injuries on her hands and feet that had occurred up to 10 days prior, around the time of the crime. After intensive interrogations, the first to admit responsibility was Fernando, followed by Jorge. Consequently, Alida felt she had no choice but to confess her guilt as well. Alida revealed that on the night of the maid, she distracted the guard, allowing her accomplices to break into Elizabeth's room. Furthermore, she stated that she cleaned up the crime scene and that it was Fernando who took Elizabeth's life. Alida did not conceal her motives, stating that she acted out of frustration with the imposed rules and the prohibitions on seeing her boyfriend. Meanwhile, the head of the forensic department emphasized the composure of the criminals, who confessed to committing their actions fully aware of the consequences and without being under the influence of alcohol or illegal substances. The criminals also revealed that they had planned to take Elizabeth's life several months prior when her relationship with Alida became unbearable. However, this was not the only motive. Another goal was to collect a life insurance policy worth $100,000. As new details of the case emerged and were covered in the media, public sentiment towards Alida deteriorated day by day, peaking when it became known that she was the one who initiated the crime that led to her mother's death. However, Alida's grandfather decided to visit his granddaughter in prison, hoping to hug and forgive her, as she was his blood. To his surprise, during one of these visits, Alida began to behave coldly towards him, insulting him, even telling him not to return. This occurred in March, 2 months after Elizabeth's death. Following this, he stated that Alida was now dead to him and immediately filed a lawsuit to exclude her from the inheritance due to her unworthy behavior, intending to prevent Alida from receiving her mother's inheritance. Consequently, a legal battle over the inheritance began between Alida and her family. Despite Elizabeth's relatives assuring that there was a will in favor of Alida's grandfather, this document, as previously mentioned, mysteriously disappeared from Elizabeth's office and from the city registrar's office. The accountant who worked with Elizabeth noted that the only person with access to Elizabeth's documents was her own daughter. By May of that same year, Alida initiated the process of the will from prison in an attempt to inherit her mother's estate, but she was unaware that she was not the only heir. Alejandro also filed a lawsuit, claiming that he and Elizabeth were not divorced but had merely decided to live separately and, in his opinion, he had the right to receive half of the estate as her widower. Liliana Vasquez Marin asserted that her sister and Alejandro divorced in 2007 with mutual consent and that both already had new partners. Alejandro's response was swift. He confirmed that they had indeed begun the divorce process but never finalized it, as they were concerned about their daughter and thought that finalizing the divorce might significantly impact her. Amid this inheritance dispute, another brother of Elizabeth intervened to assert that when they were handling the funeral, Alejandro was only interested in money. Additionally, he emphasized that it was too suspicious that two key documents in this case, the divorce certificate and the will in which his sister bequeathed all her property to their father, had gone missing. He also reported that Alida's father, taking advantage of his position and influence as a lawyer, publicly stated that his daughter would be sentenced to only 8 years in prison and would be released on parole after 3 years. Faced with these issues, the family lawyer provided the court with an executive document recognizing a foreign judgment, which stated that Elizabeth had divorced in the United States by mutual consent and that this document was valid in Peru. Over the next several months, Alida attempted to launch a campaign against her grandfather, choosing to slander him. She even dared to claim that he and one of her uncles were responsible for Elizabeth's death. The family was easily able to debunk these statements, asserting that Alida did this solely to harm her grandfather. Disappointment and grief gradually took a toll on his health and well-being, leading to his demise on December 27, 2011. He suffered a heart attack that resulted in his death. His remains were buried at the Campos Cemetery in Huapi, alongside those of his daughter, Elizabeth. After Alida's grandfather's death, the Vasquez family increased the number of lawsuits Alida to eliminate the possibility of them inheriting wealth. In the midst of the battles for inheritance, a lawsuit was simultaneously ongoing against Alida and her 2 accomplices for the death of Elizabeth. The first court hearing was scheduled for April 12 and was to take place in the 3rd Criminal Chamber for prisoners. However, the hearing was postponed until the 24th of that month after the court denied Alejandro's request to participate as a civil party in the process. When the time finally arrived for the first hearing, the suspects appeared in court dressed in black, with black nails, black pants, and a purple blouse. Alida attempted to appear calm, but her facade crumbled as soon as Ivan Melgar, the senior assistant prosecutor from the 9th prosecution of Lima, began mentioning more than 15 witnesses who would be called during the proceedings. Among these witnesses were Elizabeth's maid and the suspects, who were asked to testify about their state of mind the day before the crime was committed. The prosecution requested a repeated psychiatric evaluation for Alida after her defense requested to declare her innocent on the grounds that she had been suffering from bipolar disorder since 2007. During the debates, the deputy chief prosecutor officially filed for 30 years of imprisonment for her and the 2 other defendants, in addition to a payment of $27,000 as damages in civil proceedings. After the prosecution presented evidence, she pleaded not guilty and refused to claim any early dismissal or sentencing. On May 14, 2012, Fernando González Asenjo was sentenced to 28 years of imprisonment, and a week later, on May 21, Jorge Cornejo Ruiz received a similar sentence. While testifying, Alida accusing her former partner and his friend of carrying out the attack on her mother. She also insisted that they had been hired by her uncle, who allegedly had connections to the illegal banned substance trade. This statement was supported by her father, who stated that the real criminals had exploited his daughter's mental illness to cause Elizabeth's death. Neither the victim's family nor the public believed this assertion. The trial took an unexpected turn when Fernando testified in court. During his testimony, he stated that he and Jorge had decided to commit the crime after Alida invited them to her home on January 26, 2010. Faced with this unexpected situation, the prosecution noted that Fernando's testimony contradicted his earlier statements made during the investigative phase, where he had claimed that he, Jorge, and Fernando had jointly planned the crime. Now, he had retracted his words. Given the circumstances, the prosecution announced that a confrontation would take place among the three suspects, mandated Jorge and Fernando to testify in court as witnesses. Eventually, Jorge provided testimony that Alida had offered him $20,000 not to speak about the events of that fateful night. Details also emerged regarding a plan devised by Fernando, in which the criminal group was supposed to go missing along with her mother, but Jorge asserted that he did not agree to be part of this plan. The Jorge's lawyer noted that it was established that his client did not participate in either planning the events that led to Elizabeth's death or in carrying out the attack. Ultimately, Alida made a shocking statement, saying that she did not regret that Fernando killed her mother, claiming she had clearly seen it and did not want to take responsibility for what he did. The lawyer also assured that Fernando's statements were spontaneous and that he had received no bribes to change his original statement. The maid, Maria Liliana, also noted that Elizabeth was against her daughter's relationship with Fernando because Elizabeth considered him a slacker. She reiterated her previous statements regarding Alida's confession and Alejandro's threats. After these testimonies, the prosecution and oversight body requested a copy of her statements to initiate an investigation against Senior Judge Alejandro in connection with the alleged threats he made toward Maria. At the time the appeal was initiated, the court granted Alida's request to recognize her as the heir to her deceased grandfather's estate. This caused outrage in the Vasquez family, who filed an appeal against the aforementioned ruling. According to the family's lawyer, it was proven that the accused was involved in the events that led to her mother's death, and that was sufficient to strip her of any chance of inheriting property from their family. Even greater uncertainty in the judicial proceedings was introduced by 4 experts tasked with establishing the psychological profile of Alida. As they reached contradictory conclusions, 2 stated that she actually had bipolar disorder affecting her ability to think clearly, while the other 2 declared that the disorder altered her emotional capabilities but not her consciousness. Consequently, she was very well aware and understood what she was doing, and she was fully responsible for her actions. One of the psychologists provided the court with drawings by Alida and printed statistics indicating that she had an above-average IQ, which suggested that she could manipulate others. Based on the results of the psychological testing, the prosecution claimed that the bipolar disorder referred to by Alida's defense was not an illness but an emotional disorder. Therefore, she should be deemed sane and receive a strict punishment. At one of the final hearings, expert testimony was presented by the specialist who examined Elizabeth. He reported that the bloodstains found in Elizabeth's car suggested that she may have still been alive when she was placed there. During his closing arguments, the senior assistant prosecutor stated that at the time of the crime, the accused was not suffering from bipolar disorder, was stable, and most likely had carefully planned everything in advance. After countless attempts by Alida, Elizabeth Espino Vasquez, to distort what happened and deny the truth, on December 24, 2012, she was found guilty of murdering her mother, Elizabeth Vasquez Marin, and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. While the judge read the sentence, she pulled out an icon and, with tears in her eyes, began to pray, tearfully declaring that the sentence was unfair. For several minutes, she spoke with her lawyer, who stated that he would appeal the verdict. The lawyer continued to insist that various clinical and psychological analyses conducted by renowned specialists showed that Alida suffered from an emotional affective disorder, and this should be taken into account during the review of the sentence. By that time, Alida was still listed as a potential heir to her grandfather's and mother's estates, was therefore continuing to process the necessary documentation to inherit them. In light of this, the Vasquez family demanded that the Fifth World Court make a ruling on the matter, as the procedure had been halted in 2011. However, over the next 8 years, all attempts by the Vasquez family to obtain a judicial decision on this matter were unsuccessful. On January 21, 2021, Alida received news of her father Alejandro's death from natural causes. To this day, legal proceedings regarding whether the Vasquez family can exclude Alida from the list of heirs are ongoing. The entire Vasquez family has stated that this situation has been a true torment for them. This case shook all of Peru, revealing that there are people who, in pursuit of their goals, do not hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way, even their own mother. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bill Mowbray. Bill Mowbray lived in Brownsville, Texas, USA, in 1987. He was a decent and loving man who was married to Susie. This was his second marriage. From his first marriage, Bill had a daughter named Christine, who lived with her mother. When Susie met Bill, she was also divorced and had brought her 2 children to live with them. Over the past 9 years, they have built a happy family together. They were only 4 years apart in age and shared many things in common. Despite Susie's eccentric personality, Bill thought of her as the ideal wife. Bill was dedicated not only to his family but also to his career. After attending college, he began working in car sales and eventually transformed into a prominent businessman. By 1987, he had successfully managed Mal Motors, a Cadillac dealership in Brownsville, for 13 years. Susie actively supported his work, often visiting the dealership and even appearing in commercials broadcast across the city. Their success brought them considerable wealth, making them local celebrities regularly seen on TV. The family enjoyed traveling and owned a large mansion in Brownsville, 2 beachfront villas, and several luxury cars. On the surface, their life appeared enviable, but in reality, it was far less glamorous. In recent years, Bill's business had struggled, with the dealership stagnating and showing no signs of growth. Bill realized he was sinking deeper into debt because his expenses far exceeded his income. Despite facing financial difficulties, they upheld an image of wealth and continued to spend lavishly. As their money problems worsened, it became evident they were facing a serious financial crisis. By 1987, the situation had also severely impacted Bill's mental health. He began suffering from depression and often voiced that ending his own life might be the only way to escape their predicament. For Susie, this was an extremely difficult time. Her husband had never spoken or behaved this way before, and she feared he might do something drastic. His relatives were equally concerned for his well-being. They arranged consultations with a psychotherapist in the hopes of helping him, but their efforts yielded little progress. Bill remained firm in his belief that their family urgently needed money, otherwise, the business would collapse, leaving them on the verge of poverty. A solution to their financial struggles seemed nowhere in sight. Facing the threat of bankruptcy, Susie and Bill ultimately believed their best hope lay in securing a new loan from the bank. On September 15, 1987, Susie, 39, and Bill, 43, called to wish Susie's son a happy 16th birthday. At the time, her son and daughter were visiting their father. The conversation was warm and enjoyable, and everything seemed normal. Later that evening, Susie and Bill watched a TV show together before heading to bed. In the early hours of the morning, around 2:15 a.m., Susie woke up to the terrifying scene of her husband holding a weapon pointed at his own head. Before she could react, he pulled the trigger, using his right hand while lying on his side. Shocked and terrified, Susie called out to him, but he didn't respond. Blood rapidly soaked the bed, and with mounting horror, she realized the gravity of his injury. Panicked, she rushed to the home phone to seek help but accidentally dialed the number of her work partner, Bill Luke Roy, instead of emergency services. Susie told Luke what had happened and confessed she didn't know what to do. Luke immediately urged her to call 911. She followed the advice and called the emergency services. However, she had already lost precious minutes, which forced the ambulance to set off immediately. When the ambulance crew arrived at the scene, they found Susie outside the house, standing calmly with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. Showing no signs of distress, she led the paramedics inside and gestured toward the bedroom without entering it. Inside, Bill was lying on the bed, still alive but in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later passed away. The cause of death was clear: a weapon injury to the head. Beside him lay a weapon in a pool of blood. Initially, investigators suspected that he had harmed himself, but they decided to carry out a more thorough investigation before reaching any conclusions. Forensic experts began analyzing the scene. The unusually large volume of blood warranted a detailed investigation. Blood spatters were found on much of the furniture, on the wall near the bed, and even on the ceiling fan. Fortunately, a blood spatter expert was brought in to assist. The expert confirmed that Bill had died from a single wound to the head. The only fingerprints found on the weapon during testing were Bill's. Susie has consistently maintained her perspective on the story since the beginning, asserting that Bill suffered from prolonged depression, had a tendency to harm himself, and had expressed these thoughts to multiple people on several occasions. Some of her statements were corroborated by her relatives and friends, as well as Bill's. Bill, a businessman, had been facing mounting challenges in managing his dealership, which seemed to have worsened his mental health. However, Susie's behavior raised significant doubts. She does not seem to be a grieving widow. Instead, she discusses her husband's death calmly, as though it were merely a trivial matter. Still, this wasn't the primary reason investigators began to scrutinize her further. The most shocking detail emerged in the 12 hours following Bill's death. During this time, Jim, Bill's brother, arrived at Bill's residence intending to speak with Susie, offer her support, and try to piece together what had happened by observing the scene. To his surprise, when Jim went upstairs, he heard music and the laughter of women. When he knocked, Susie came out casually and explained that she was hosting a party with friends. Jim found her behavior to be deeply inappropriate and upsetting. Later, Jim became one of Susie's most vocal critics as she desperately tried to prove her innocence. It was discovered that the women attending the gathering had removed all the furniture and carpeting from the bedroom. Not only were they listening to music and socializing, but the most alarming revelation was that they had repainted the bedroom a different color. Police viewed these actions as obvious attempts to interfere with evidence. Despite these suspicious actions, the blood expert successfully reconstructed the sequence of the incident. It is now clear that the case had nothing to do with Bill's self-harm. Detectives became convinced that Susie was the one who had pulled the trigger. Based on evidence collected on the first day, there appeared to be little doubt remaining. The focus then shifted to the remaining pieces of furniture and the nightgown Susie had been wearing. After thorough analysis, the expert concluded that Bill had been murdered by his wife, who had attacked him in the head while he was asleep. Susie was shocked when accused and immediately sought legal help by hiring a lawyer. The financial difficulties in their family's marriage have been confirmed by multiple sources. Susie said that Bill's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a bank loan led him to harm himself. Bill's family was aware of his dire financial situation, but not everyone believed that Susie was completely innocent. Detectives interviewed a loan officer at the bank who had interacted with Bill. The officer recounted how Bill had visited the bank in a deeply distraught state, even breaking down in tears. Bill reportedly stated that, without approval for a $200,000 loan, he would die. Unfortunately, Bill's financial situation was bleak, and his loan application was rejected. The loan officer had no choice but to turn him down. Numerous witnesses attested to Bill's desperation and emotional turmoil. Despite this evidence of Bill's deteriorating mental health, suspicions about Susie remained strong. Her behavior following her husband's death was widely perceived as celebratory rather than mournful. This interpretation led to widespread public condemnation and further distrust of her character. However, her lawyer firmly maintained her innocence. Bill Mowbray, a businessman, applied for a bank loan to keep his business running and pay off existing debts. However, the bank's refusal devastated him. That evening, he returned home deeply distressed and barely interacted with anyone. Susie did her best to console him, but her efforts did little to ease his despair. In the final days of his life, Bill fell into a severe depression as he desperately searched for a solution to his financial crisis. Later, Susie shared that after this incident, Bill frequently spoke about ending his life. She tried to support him by accompanying him to a psychotherapist. The lawyer worked to find evidence that substantiated Susie's claims, and succeeded. Several of Bill's longtime friends revealed that, approximately a decade before the tragedy, Bill had attempted to end his life. This had occurred in the 1970s, before Susie and Bill married, which explained why Susie had never mentioned it. After meeting Susie, his life seemed to improve, and those close to him believed that his past struggles had been overcome. This information further reinforces the narrative that Bill has a history of self-harm. The defense attorney believed this evidence would strongly support Susie if the case went to trial. He dismissed the notion that Susie was implicated in the crime by the gathering at their house following the tragedy. Furthermore, he argued that the prosecution's case relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be easily challenged. Susie's unusual behavior was not enough to indicate that she might resort to violence. Bill's family, however, argued that Susie's actions demonstrated a complete lack of empathy toward him. Meanwhile, an outraged Jim demanded justice for Bill and insisted that the killer be held responsible. Investigators suspect that someone else may have been involved in the crime and are questioning the circumstances surrounding the incident. Specifically, they were puzzled why Bill chose to end his life while lying next to his wife in bed. Typically, individuals who wish to end their lives tend to prefer doing so in solitude. If Bill were to choose to end his own life, he would have two methods to consider: either keeping a loaded weapon nearby, such as placing it by his bed or under his pillow, or waking up in the middle of the night, retrieving the weapon, and returning to bed before using it. Susie claimed she didn't notice Bill getting up at night, though it's possible she simply didn't wake up. She mentioned that she had once handled her husband's weapon after discovering it under the pillow. She explained that he kept it in the bedroom for self-defense, adding that such behavior was typical among Texans. Detectives, however, questioned why there were no fingerprints on the weapon if Susie had truly picked it up. Susie claimed that Bill regularly cleaned and wiped the weapon, but investigators remained skeptical. They began scrutinizing the dynamics of Susie's and Bill's relationship. During the inquiry, they discovered that she had multiple extramarital affairs during her marriage, and, importantly, Bill was aware of them. After numerous acts of infidelity, she and her children had left him and moved to Austin. However, Bill eventually persuaded her to return, and they resumed living together. Despite this reconciliation, many believed the relationship remained deeply strained. Susie and Bill were preparing for a divorce and discussing how to divide their assets, which created significant tension and might have given her a motive to murder her husband. Susie's behavior following the incident raised further suspicions. After the incident, upon realizing that her husband was seriously injured but still alive, she chose not to call an ambulance, a decision that might have increased his chances of survival. Instead, she called a colleague, Bill Luke Roy. Susie claimed she was confused and unsure of what to do in such a situation, so she sought advice from a family friend. This initially led some to speculate that Luke might have been involved in the crime, though no evidence supported this theory. According to Luke, Susie's voice lacked any signs of panic during their phone call. Nonetheless, Luke advised her to contact emergency services, which Susie did without hesitation after speaking with him. When experts investigated the scene and examined Bill's body, they discovered a bullet wound in his left hand. Strangely, despite the close-range attack, Susie, Bill's wife, was not covered in blood. Forensic experts noted that an attack at point-blank range typically produces small blood droplets. However, Bill's right hand was found neatly tucked beneath the pillow, which makes the possibility of him causing harm to himself in this manner highly unlikely. The prosecution built a strong case with a solid motive: financial gain. Susie, Bill's wife, appeared to benefit greatly from her husband's death, particularly in terms of insurance. Shortly before his death, Bill had made significant changes to his insurance policy. He increased the payout amount to nearly $2 million but removed Susie as a beneficiary. Instead, he designated the payout to his daughter from a previous marriage, Christine. Susie had even contacted the insurance company in advance to confirm the details of the policy. Crucially, these changes to the policy were set to take effect just days after Bill's death. During her call with the insurance company, Susie uncovered crucial information, which indirectly pointed to the possibility of a motive to act quickly. With Bill weighed down by financial troubles, his death could secure the money needed to resolve their outstanding debts. Apparently, Bill had removed Susie from the beneficiary list due to a lack of trust in her and instead sought to provide lifelong financial security for his daughter. This situation raised several troubling implications. Firstly, if Bill had planned his own death, he likely would have waited for the amended insurance policy to officially take effect, which would have occurred in just a few days. Furthermore, as someone knowledgeable in legal and financial matters, he would have been aware of Texas laws regarding voluntary death. Specifically, insurance policies do not pay out compensation to beneficiaries if the insured dies voluntarily within 2 years of the policy's activation. This means all of Bill's intentions to secure his daughter's future were doomed from the outset. Detectives believed that Bill had no intention of ending his life willingly. When he spoke about such matters, it was likely to evoke pity or manipulate others, such as persuading the bank to grant him a loan. However, given the strange circumstances surrounding his death, it seemed he didn't end his life himself. Someone might have helped him. Based on circumstantial evidence, Susie was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. At the trial, a key forensic method was used: blood spatter analysis. This technique, first introduced in the 1950s by Herbert MacDonald, played a critical role in providing evidence and substantiating the charges. MacDonald himself testified during Susie's trial, offering essential insights. Blood spatter analysis had been a foundational method in the U.S. justice system and widely accepted for years. However, in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences raised doubts about its reliability, emphasizing that accurate and meaningful use of the analysis requires significant expertise and experience. Evidence in Bill's murder case was analyzed by inexperienced experts, but this oversight was overlooked during the trial. Although blood sample analysis has been heavily criticized, it remains valuable and continues to be used, now exclusively by highly qualified and experienced specialists. In the past, doubts about this method had led to the reconsideration of several convictions. However, by the time of Susie's case, Herbert MacDonald's method was widely accepted and largely unquestioned. During the trial, Susie's ex-husband defended her, stating that he had never observed any signs of aggression throughout their relationship. He also stated that Susie was not even aware of how to use a weapon. Additionally, a family friend named Luke, Bill's business partner and Susie's initial point of contact after the incident, supported her and expressed his belief that Bill may have willingly ended his own life. Luke explained that he had planned to leave the car dealership due to work-related issues, and this decision had deeply affected Bill. In the final days of Bill's life, he reportedly struggled with loneliness. The prosecutor's office persisted in proving its case. To strengthen its argument, it presented the marital bed as evidence during the trial, complete with 2 mannequins representing Bill and Susie, as well as traces of Bill's blood that were still visible. This allowed the prosecution to vividly illustrate its version of what transpired on that tragic night. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury ultimately convicted Susie of murder, sentencing her on June 5, 1988, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Susie still had a group of supporters who believed in her innocence, including her son, Wade, and her daughter from a previous marriage. Both worked tirelessly to overturn the conviction, firmly convinced that Susie had stood by her husband until the very end and was incapable of violence against him. While Susie served time in prison, Wade enrolled in law school and dedicated himself to meticulously reviewing the case. He searched for errors or misconduct by the prosecution and investigators, hoping to find grounds for an appeal. Wade collaborated closely with his mother's lawyer to challenge the verdict and fight for justice. The case required processing a massive amount of complex information, which made the effort time-consuming. Wade was determined to secure justice as Susie had already spent 8 years in prison. Eventually, Susie's lawyer submitted a critical appeal that could not be dismissed. During the prosecution's case, the blood spatter analysis played a key role, but serious concerns emerged about whether the forensic expert had been qualified to handle this aspect. The expert had examined over 40 stains found on the nightgown. Interestingly, the prosecution's main piece of evidence turned out to be its biggest weakness. The defense disputed the accuracy of the tests conducted on the nightgown, arguing that various substances, not just blood, could cause the fabric to glow. Moreover, the nightgown had never been specifically tested for blood, and since it was no longer available, its credibility as evidence was entirely compromised. The appeal was accepted, leading to a thorough reconsideration of the evidence before the 1990 retrial. The absence of blood spatter on the weapon can be explained as follows. The gunshot to Bill's left arm likely occurred while he was holding the weapon under the pillow, with his left hand positioned on the opposite side of his head. The shot caused an exit wound. Certain actions of the experts during the retrial seemed questionable. For instance, the forensic expert who conducted Bill's autopsy made a key statement. Although he admitted that he could not be absolutely certain Susie had killed Bill, he maintained, perhaps to protect his reputation, that Bill could not have harmed himself without external assistance. Given that only Bill and Susie were in the house, Susie was naturally seen as the prime suspect. Wade's legal studies and collaboration with attorneys proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that violated Susie's constitutional right to a fair trial. A major revelation emerged when the prosecution brought in Herbert McDonald to re-examine Susie's nightgown and the prior findings. Contrary to the prosecutor's expectations, McDonald decisively refuted the arguments supporting Susie's guilt. However, rather than sharing McDonald's expert opinion, the prosecution deliberately concealed it and continued relying on the flawed evidence against Susie. Wade played a vital role in the fight for his mother's freedom. He now faced the challenge of presenting his findings to convince the jury. His analysis revealed deception on the prosecution's part, which violated the Brady Rule, a requirement for prosecutors to disclose all evidence that could potentially exonerate the defendant. McDonald's findings were pivotal in exposing this misconduct. Finally, Susie's day in court arrived in January 1998. By then, the once vibrant woman had been deeply affected by her years in prison, reduced to a shadow of her former self. Yet, in her weary eyes, there remained a glimmer of hope. She continued to steadfastly maintain her innocence. Susie's friends, who attended the same unusual gathering where the bedroom was repainted after her husband's death, described the event as an odd prank. They explained that it was initiated by a woman attempting to cover up the unsettling red stains in the room. According to them, Susie was unaware that her actions would later lead to accusations of evidence tampering. Both friends defended her, with one stating that the room had not been cordoned off with police tape and no warning had been issued that the investigation was ongoing. In fact, investigators initially concluded that Bill's death was a result of self-harm and showed little interest in the scene. They had planned to close the case and archive it, allowing Susie to remain in the house without implementing any security measures, such as sealing the room with police tape. The other friend explained that the group merely wanted to help Susie, who hesitated to let her children return to a bedroom stained with blood. Influenced by alcohol, they decided to repaint the room before the kids came home. Neither friend believed that Susie was guilty of any wrongdoing. During the retrial, an unqualified expert who had analyzed Susie's nightgown admitted that his original testimony at her first trial was baseless and lacked scientific foundation. Forensic expert Herbert McDonald reviewed the flawed methods used in the investigation and expressed disbelief. The stains were measured visually without proper tools, and there was no confirmation that the stains were even blood. As a result, the evidence was deemed unconvincing. Susie's lawyer presented a compelling argument during the trial, which led the jury to reconsider their stance. They began to entertain the possibility that Bill, Susie's husband, had voluntarily chosen to end his own life. Substantial evidence later emerged, outweighing the vague testimonies provided by several of Bill's friends. The defense strategy focused on one key factor underlying the tragedy: Bill's financial difficulties. After his loan application was denied, his business faced imminent collapse, pushing his family close to poverty. To ensure that his daughter from a previous marriage would receive a larger insurance payout, Bill is said to have decided to end his own life. He spent his remaining savings on increasing the life insurance payout for her. Bill's decision not to wait just a few additional days may have been driven by severe depression or a sudden deterioration in his mental health, which could have left him incapable of fully understanding the legal implications. Accounts of Bill's behavior in the days leading up to his death supported this conclusion. The defense attorney believed their case had been effectively argued. However, during the closing arguments, Susie unexpectedly lost control. As the prosecution delivered its final remarks, she screamed that she had not killed her husband and collapsed in tears. This emotional outburst took everyone by surprise. On one hand, the jury recognized the sincerity in Susie's tears and assertions of innocence. On the other hand, her uncontrolled aggression complicated the situation. Deliberations over the verdict lasted for 4 hours of tense uncertainty. Although no definitive resolution was reached regarding Susie's guilt or innocence, she was ultimately acquitted of all charges on January 23, 1998. Despite her acquittal, she continued to face opposition, with critics focusing heavily on her behavior throughout the trial. While Susie's actions were undoubtedly unusual at times, her supporters, including her son and daughter, attributed her behavior to the emotional toll and stress she endured during the ordeal. Her opponents, however, claimed that her outburst during the trial was a calculated attempt to manipulate the jury. In contrast, her lawyer argued that the outburst was unplanned, insisting that such a risky tactic would have been ill-advised, particularly since the defense had already presented substantial evidence that might have backfired with the jury. During subsequent hearings, it was revealed that the nightgown had never been used as evidence. This omission raised concerns among the investigative team, as items of such significance rarely vanish without explanation. Speculation arose that the prosecution, facing heavy criticism for their strategy, may have intentionally disposed of the nightgown to prevent further examination. This theory gained traction as many believed the nightgown might have undermined their case, particularly given the opinion of Herbert MacDonald, whose expertise could have discredited their claims. Faced with mounting challenges, the prosecution seemingly had no viable path to continue their case. Susie Mowbray was acquitted on her 50th birthday, turning the occasion into a celebratory milestone. She expressed her gratitude to her son, Wade, describing it as the best anniversary gift she had ever received. In a 2001 interview, she reflected on her release, noting that others who had been wrongfully convicted alongside her had already been freed for 3 years. Susie had spent nearly a decade in prison and shared her hope that her children would feel proud of their mother. However, not everyone supported the verdict. Bill's first wife and his daughter, Christine, believed the outcome was unjust, remaining convinced that Susie had evaded accountability for murder. After Bill's death, his first wife revealed that Susie had urgently sold off all of his belongings to secure money. This led to a fierce legal battle between Bill's first wife and Susie over his inheritance. Ultimately, no one received the life insurance payout. Susie had once planned to write a book about her struggles, but since 2002, there has been no news about her. During that time, she went to court in an attempt to reclaim Bill's insurance payout, but she ultimately lost the case. Susie's son, Wade, initially pursued a legal career but eventually left the field to provide advice to other clergymen. Interestingly, Susie, who had previously sought public attention and appeared in her husband's advertising campaigns in the 1980s, completely disappeared from public view after her failed attempt to secure the insurance funds. She did not attend the TV show in 2021 that covered her case, though her lawyer did. The lawyer described her situation as a tragedy, emphasizing that the businessman's widow had spent so many years behind bars, which had destroyed her life, while insisting he had always believed in her innocence. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Yu Young-chul. Yu Young-chul was born on April 18, 1970, into a poor family in Gochang County, South Korea. He had a challenging childhood, as he was bullied at school due to his family's low social status. This early experience of poverty is believed to have fueled his resentment toward wealthier individuals, as some of his future victims were affluent people. Yu and his siblings were abandoned by their mother at a young age. One day, their mother left them at their grandmother's house and never returned. The children were left to live in severe poverty with their elderly, ailing grandmother. Eventually, their father took them in and moved them to live with him and their new stepmother. However, the situation did not improve, as their stepmother treated them cruelly. Tragedy struck again in 1985 when Yu's father died in a traffic accident. Determined to change his life, Yu resolved to work hard and find success to escape poverty. He enrolled in an art school, but his time there was difficult. He was rejected and ostracized by his fellow students, who regarded him as mediocre. In 1988, he decided to attend the technical school to earn any available qualifications. However, instead of focusing on his studies, Yu turned to a life of crime in an attempt to make money quickly. Unfortunately for him, his criminal endeavors were largely unsuccessful. At the age of 18, Yu was arrested for stealing from a wealthy neighbor. He was sent to a juvenile detention center, but the consequences didn't end there. Since he could no longer attend his technical school classes, he was expelled, marking the beginning of a downward spiral. Yu didn't stop stealing. His thefts escalated to more valuable items, including cash and eventually cars. In 1991, he was arrested again for stealing from his landlord. This time, he was sentenced to 10 months in jail, giving him time to reflect on his actions. Despite his criminal record, his girlfriend, who worked as a masseuse, agreed to marry him, and they had a son together. However, instead of focusing on family life, Yu returned to stealing. He was caught stealing a car and sentenced to another 8 months in jail. Around the same time, Yu was diagnosed with epilepsy, leading to a brief stay in a medical facility before returning to his normal life. Interestingly, this epilepsy diagnosis would later become something he used to his advantage. Yu was no stranger to breaking the law for personal gain and had a history of similar crimes, which he regarded as only harming insurance companies. However, over time, he escalated from minor thefts to more serious offenses, becoming increasingly corrupt and unhinged. Yu served a 2-year prison sentence for illegally selling adult photos. Upon his release, he resumed stealing, eventually landing back in prison for another 3 years. Meanwhile, Yu's wife silently shouldered the responsibility of raising their son while he repeatedly committed theft and faced arrests. Her patience finally ran out in the year 2000 when he was accused of abusing a young girl and was subsequently sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. This prompted her to file for divorce. During the investigation and while Yu was in custody, she reported his cruel behavior towards her and his struggles with alcohol abuse. After his release in 2003, Yu embarked on a path of depravity and crime that would horrify the world and plunge the city into fear for years. During his time in prison, he became fascinated with Jong Du-yeon, a murderer who killed 9 people between 1999 and 2000, primarily targeting wealthy individuals to commit theft driven by greed for accumulating wealth. Yu seemed to identify with Jong, sharing a deep resentment toward the rich, whom he blamed for his own misfortunes. Simultaneously, Yu developed profound animosity towards women following his divorce. This resentment, combined with his admiration for Jong, fueled his hatred and destructive thoughts. He later expressed beliefs that women should not be escorts and that wealthy people should be held accountable for their privilege. After moving into his mother's house following his release, These twisted ideologies drove him further down the path toward the horrific crimes that would eventually earn him the title of the Cloaked Killer. Yu was granted permission to see his son, though these visits could have taken a much darker turn. Yu had devised a plan to exact revenge on his ex-wife in the most brutal way possible, intending to kill both her and their son. However, he ultimately admitted that he couldn't bring himself to follow through with it, leaving his wife and child unharmed. Instead, he shifted his focus to a new target: wealthy individuals. But before pursuing this goal, Yu decided he needed to practice killing, and he already had a plan for how to do so. Yu crafted his own weapon by modifying a large hammer, shortening its handle for convenience. Armed with this weapon, along with a knife and gloves, he prepared for what he called his revenge. To test his weapon, Yu began luring stray dogs into isolated areas of the woods and brutally attacking them. It's worth noting that many serial killers exhibit similar behaviors in their early years. By September 2003, Yu was just an ordinary man who had recently been released from prison and was savoring his newfound freedom. However, this freedom was short-lived. Within 2 weeks, he began executing his sinister plan, targeting a wealthy neighborhood. His first victim was identified quickly. Professor Lee Deok-soo, a wealthy man in his 70s, lived with his wife, Lee Eun-ok, in one of the elegant houses in the neighborhood. At 10 a.m., Yu forcefully entered their home, armed with his homemade hammer. He first struck Deok-soo in the neck before shifting his focus to Eun-ok, brutally striking her with the hammer until he was certain she was dead. Finally, he brought Deok-soo's life to an end. After committing the crime, Yu calmly cleaned the rooms, scrubbed away the blood, and walked out. However, he soon realized he had left his knife behind and returned to retrieve it. This time, when he broke into the house more aggressively and caused damage, he deliberately staged the scene to resemble a botched robbery in an attempt to mislead investigators. This plan ultimately backfired. When the police inspected the crime scene, they discovered footprints that later proved to be a significant clue. On October 9th, in another upscale neighborhood of Seoul, Yu, carrying the same weapons, broke into a wealthy family's home around noon. Inside, he encountered an 85-year-old woman named Kang Eun-sun and fatally stabbed her with a knife. Her screams caused her daughter-in-law, Lee Suk-jin, to rush into the room. Yu angrily demands that Suk-jin bow her head in defeat, but she firmly refuses and even threatens him in front of her husband and sons. Enraged, Yu reacted violently and killed her swiftly. Eun-sun's disabled nephew, Go Jin-soo, became Yu's next victim. Yu forced him to kneel and brutally beat him with a hammer, killing him mercilessly. This case revealed just how severely Yu's psychopathy had escalated. Evidence from this crime scene and previous ones caught the attention of the police, providing them with a crucial lead. Investigators launched a search through their database to identify the perpetrator. Meanwhile, Yu continued his violent spree, seemingly emboldened by his actions. His next target was a 60-year-old woman named Ju Jun-hee, who lived alone. Yu broke into her house and, upon encountering her, dragged her into the bathroom, where he savagely beat her nearly to death. Her son later discovered her barely alive, but she succumbed to her injuries despite paramedics' best efforts, dying half an hour after being found. Media outlets began reporting on strange deaths in the area, noting their geographic proximity and raising questions about whether the crimes were connected. Evidence from various crime scenes indicated similarities between the killings, making the connection increasingly apparent. Public fear grew, yet police initially denied any links between the murders. It would be several weeks before Yu's dark urges drove him to kill again. On November 4, 2003, he broke into a home in a wealthy neighborhood located in Gyeonggi Province. Inside, he confronted the housekeeper with a knife, threatening her to comply with his demands. Under duress, she led him to the owner's bedroom, where the 87-year-old homeowner, Kim Jong-suk, and a 1-year-old child, presumably her grandson, were present. But this time, Yu encountered a situation he had never faced before. As Yu rushed at Jong-suk with a hammer, the housekeeper grabbed the baby and attempted to escape through the door. Instead of attacking the child, Yu took him from her, carried him to another room, and left him there unharmed. Returning to the bedroom, you discovered the homeowner was dead and redirected his violence toward the housekeeper, who tragically lost her life in the attack. However, this time, you made a critical mistake. To cover his tracks, he resorted to his usual method of smashing property to make the scene appear like a failed robbery. However, he realized he had left blood traces on the safe door after cutting his finger while attempting to open it, a crucial lead for the police. If Yu's decision to spare the baby initially seemed to hint at a shred of humanity, his chilling actions afterward destroyed any such impression, leaving a trail of horror and disgust. You attempted to destroy evidence by setting the house on fire with the child still inside, then watched the flames consume parts of the home from a safe distance. Despite the intense fire that destroyed the bodies and the main bedroom, most of the house remained intact. Investigators were able to recover surviving CCTV footage, which offered them a glimpse of South Korea's new serial killer. The footage showed a man wearing a sweater he had taken from the house, likely to cover the bloodstains on his clothes. Although only visible from behind, the image provided a valuable lead for investigators. Police also discovered another set of shoe prints at the crime scene, further linking this murder to previous ones. Still, Yu continued his spree. While following his established pattern, he decided to deviate and seek change, which led him to his next victim. Yu, now posing as a police officer by obtaining a uniform, began extorting money from women working in escort services or the red light district. He excelled at this illegal activity, earning enough money to rent an apartment and maintain his reckless lifestyle. During this time, Yu started dating a woman from the escort services. His disdain for women deepened when she refused his proposal to live together after discovering his troubled past, including his previous marriage. This rejection marked a turning point for Yu, sparking his desire for revenge. On March 16, 2004, Yu returned to the streets with sinister intentions. Dressed as a police officer, he pretended to arrest a girl and took her to his apartment. This time, unlike his previous victims, he killed her by strangulation, fully revealing his deeply sadistic nature. Due to the inability to safely move the body out of the third floor, Yu decided to put it in a grocery bag and bury it near Sogang University. To ensure he wouldn't reuse the burial site, he marked the spot with a bottle cap. His next victim deviated from his usual pattern. After buying fake Viagra from a street vendor on Jae-sun but it doesn't work, Yu once again disguises himself as a police officer and arrests Jae-sun for selling illegal pharmaceuticals. Driving Jae-sun's personal van, he went to a secluded area and launched a brutal attack. He wounded Jae-sun in the head and neck, but Jae-sun fought back, injuring him in the process. Infuriated by the resistance, Yu struck back with a hammer, landing over 20 brutal blows to Jae-sun's head. Yu's blood was discovered in Jae-sun's van, forcing him to eliminate the evidence. He drove the van to a nearby parking lot under cover of night and set it on fire, destroying both the vehicle and the body inside. Following this event, Yu focused on targeting women working in escort services within the red light district. This marked the beginning of a brief but horrifying series of murders, resulting in the deaths of many people and leaving deep scars on the families affected by his violent actions. Yu changed his approach by luring women to his apartment, where he assaulted them individually before burying their bodies in various locations. To avoid burying in the same place, he marked each place with a bottle cap. He repeated this method with 9 victims, however, his lack of foresight ultimately led to his downfall. Suspicion arose when a massage parlor owner began noticing a pattern of unexplained disappearances. Several of the missing women worked for establishments owned by the same man. Strangely enough, family or friends are often unaware of these disappearances because many of these girls live independently, which makes them more likely to become targets of attacks. One day, the massage shop owner received a request from a man who wanted to use the services of a girl working at the shop. Further investigation revealed that the phone number belonged to one of the earlier missing victims. Alarmed, the owner contacted the police and worked with them to craft a plan aimed at capturing the perpetrator, suspecting that the women were being abducted and possibly trafficked. When the investigators sent an undercover employee to collaborate on the plan, the police prepared to apprehend the suspect, seemingly close to detaining Yu. However, you abruptly canceled the meeting and called the girl back. The reason? The girl's height played a key role. Many of Yu's victims had been forced into submissive positions, often kneeling, which indicated his preference for control. His targets were typically elderly individuals, vulnerable women, or escort service workers, chosen because they were easier to overpower. Encountering a taller girl made you feel less dominant, which prompted him to call off the meeting at the last minute. The police didn't give up. Shortly afterward, they identified the perfect undercover officer, and you took the bait. Before he could act, he was surrounded by police officers. During his arrest, Yu was seen desperately chewing something, later discovered to be business cards belonging to several women. During interrogation, he provided shocking information far beyond the expectations of the police. Yu was transferred to the Seoul Police Department, where investigators questioned him thoroughly about his activities. Although he denied any involvement in abducting or trafficking women, Yu ultimately confessed to multiple murders in affluent neighborhoods. He claimed to have killed more than 20 people, beginning with the Gangnam-gu murders and concluding with the murder of an escort worker just days before his arrest. Despite his confession, the police were skeptical and hesitant to believe his claims immediately, suspecting him of exaggerating to shock them. Whether Yu had fully planned his next move is unclear, but he exploited his epilepsy to stage a fake seizure. Remarkably, the officers believed him, removed his handcuffs, and left the door open, assuming he was too weak to pose any threat. This lapse in judgment allowed him to escape to his apartment, where he began destroying evidence. Within 12 hours, the police located Yu again and detained him, this time ensuring there was no opportunity for him to flee. During interrogations, Yu repeatedly changed his story. He eventually agreed to guide the police to the burial sites of his victims. During these crime scene investigations, he earned the nickname the Cloaked Killer because the police had to photograph the remains while Yu was draped in a yellow cloak, his face concealed behind a mask. The police department faced significant criticism for its handling of the case. Yu might never have been caught if not for the intervention of local massage parlor owners. He had openly stated that he intended to continue his acts of revenge until someone stopped him. During the trial, Yu attempted to attack the judge and then attempted to end his life while in custody, causing unnecessary delays in the trial process. Upon returning to court, he attempted to assault a spectator and showed no remorse toward the families of his victims. Eventually, Yu Young-chul was found guilty and received the maximum sentence. He is now on death row. Although South Korea has not carried out the death penalty since 1997, his appalling crimes and utter disregard for human life have sparked outrage across the nation. Even if the death penalty is not enforced, the public finds solace in knowing that Yu will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Raymond Wright. On January 11, 2018, in Sacramento, California, Dean Wright grew increasingly anxious as he waited for his brother. They had planned to meet earlier that day, but Dean was unable to reach Raymond. The brothers were close, talking every day and maintaining a strong relationship. But suddenly, Raymond disappeared without a trace. There were no calls, no texts, and no activity on social media. He stopped posting photos, stopped visiting his personal page, and stopped answering the phone. Raymond, a 55-year-old carpenter, owned his own workshop and was known for being skilled at managing his business. Occasionally, he would drop off the radar, but never for more than half a day, usually due to work-related matters. This time, however, Raymond had been missing for an entire day, leaving his close friends and family deeply concerned. His sister called Dean, asking if he knew where Raymond was. Raymond's two daughters were also worried. They had noticed their father's unusually long absence and contacted Dean to share their concerns. The girls said they had tried calling their father all day, but their calls kept going to voicemail. Dean, growing increasingly worried, repeatedly called Raymond's number but had no success. That evening, he decided to visit Raymond's home in a suburb of Sacramento. Raymond also rented a nearby woodworking shop, which was doing well. Unfortunately, Dean found no sign of his brother in either the house or the shop. There were no indications of forced entry or robbery. Dean, who was familiar with both the house and the shop, carefully inspected the premises but found nothing unusual or any clues about Raymond's whereabouts. To add to the mystery, Raymond's pickup truck was also missing. At this point, Dean began to panic. Raymond had disappeared without any notice or plans to leave, leaving his family at a loss as to where to look. The situation left everyone worried, including Raymond's ex-wife. She and Raymond got married in June 1994. For many years, they tried to build a happy family. However, after some time living together, their differences in life views began to cause problems. Raymond was busy setting up a business, which made him completely absorbed in work and often neglectful of his daily family life. In 2001, the couple divorced. The children stayed with their mother, but Raymond remained actively involved in raising them and often visited them. After the divorce, Raymond stayed single for many years, avoiding the idea of starting a new family due to his heavy workload. In 2009, he remarried, but this marriage did not last long and ended in divorce that same year. According to relatives and friends, Raymond became extremely depressed because he was unable to maintain a personal life, largely due to his work addiction. This eventually led him to turn to alcohol. He had struggled with drinking since his early 20s but had quit when he first got married, maintaining a sober lifestyle for many years. Both his first and second wives confirmed that he had abstained from alcohol throughout their marriages. His second divorce had a profound impact on him, causing his life to spiral out of control. Struggling to cope, Raymond turned to heavy drinking, which led to serious problems. Although he was never aggressive or short-tempered, alcohol made him stubborn and reckless. In November 2011, after drinking heavily, he decided to drive under the influence. He lost control of his vehicle and caused an accident. The drivers and passengers in the other car involved were injured and filed a lawsuit against him for drunk driving. As a result, Raymond was sentenced to 18 months of probation and required to pay a substantial fine. This incident served as a wake-up call for him, and he immediately quit drinking. Determined to change, he joined Alcoholics Anonymous and attended daily meetings, fully committing to overcoming his addiction. During this time, his family and friends stood by him, offering their unwavering support. They noticed significant improvements in his behavior and overall health. It seemed as though he had found a new purpose in life, eager to make up for the time he had lost with his loved ones due to his struggle with addiction. From then on, he stopped drinking and started spending more time with his family. He even made a beautiful baby crib in his woodworking shop for his niece. He planned to spend the holidays with his family. Unfortunately, his loved ones would not have the opportunity to go on vacation with him. On January 11, 2018, Raymond disappeared without a trace. His family still has no idea where he is. When Dean visited his brother's house for the second time on January 13, 2018, he noticed a strange smell as soon as he entered. Even when Raymond was around, he had never supported smoking illegal substances. Suddenly, from the darkness of the room, a strange man emerged and confronted Dean, attempting to chase him away. After realizing Dean had no intention of leaving, the stranger ran out the back door and escaped. Confused by the incident, Dean called 911. A few minutes later, the police arrived at the scene. After conducting a thorough search of Raymond's home, the only evidence they found was a cup filled with ice and soda, complete with a lid and straw. This clue would later become crucial to the investigation. The encounter was so sudden and suspicious that the police quickly began to suspect a connection between the stranger's escape and Raymond's disappearance. Friends described Raymond as a creative and kind person. After overcoming his struggles with alcohol, his positive traits became even more prominent. No one believed he would abandon his family, especially after becoming a grandfather, a moment that brought him immense joy and happiness. Raymond was known for being uncontroversial, even during his struggles with addiction. Following this strange encounter, Dean's anxiety increased. He had never met the man before, and the stranger immediately became the prime suspect in Raymond's mysterious disappearance. However, the police had no clue as to the man's whereabouts. Raymond was officially listed as missing, and a search was launched to find him. Police speculated that he might have relapsed and resumed drinking. However, Raymond was known as one of the most determined members of Alcoholics Anonymous. He attended meetings not to seek support but to inspire others, proving that it was possible to give up alcohol completely and live a full life, even after years of heavy drinking. Police found no trace of alcohol in Raymond's home. They checked his bank card transactions, mobile phone records, and vehicle registration database but found no activity. It was as if he had vanished. None of his acquaintances had seen him during this time. A search of the house was conducted, and volunteers joined the effort, distributing flyers with Raymond's photo and details of his car. Police also sought help from the public through the media, but no information emerged. To gather more details from Dean, the police created a composite sketch of the stranger seen in Raymond's house. Unfortunately, the sketch did not produce any matches in the database. Likewise, fingerprints and DNA collected from the cup and straw did not yield any results, as they were not in the police database. After a week of unsuccessful searching, police finally located a 2016 white Ford F-250 owned by Raymond. The vehicle was found abandoned on January 21 in the North Highlands neighborhood, an area known for its high crime rate. The location was concerning because Raymond had no known connections or business in the area, making it unlikely he would have gone there willingly. The pickup truck's license plate had been removed, but Dean identified the vehicle based on its description during the search. Forensic experts determined that the vehicle had been broken into, with the doors left ajar. These findings led police to believe that something bad had happened to Raymond. After the police impounded the car, they requested assistance from the FBI. FBI agents arrived to inspect the vehicle and used advanced techniques to search for evidence, including fingerprints that might identify a potential suspect. During the inspection, they discovered faint, dark red stains on the car's carpet. Tests confirmed that the substance was human blood. To obtain a sample of Raymond's DNA, the police retrieved a toothbrush from his home. After comparing the collected materials, they determined that the blood in the car belonged to Raymond. Although the discovery was confirmed, no evidence linking the blood to a suspect was found. The investigation continued for 2 weeks, seemingly reaching a dead end. However, an unexpected event occurred that dramatically changed the case. On January 27, 2018, an unidentified vehicle sped through Sacramento at an extremely high speed. Police pursued the car but struggled to keep up as the driver reached speeds of 200 kilometers per hour, violating multiple traffic laws and endangering lives. The chase ended abruptly when the driver crashed head-on into an oncoming vehicle at high speed. Fortunately, the other driver survived, though he was pinned by the metal inside his car. He suffered only a broken leg and minor injuries. At the time, the officers had no idea how dangerous the man they had arrested truly was. The California Highway Patrol apprehended the reckless driver, who was intoxicated at the time of the incident. The man was identified as Victor Merle Gray, an individual with a troubled legal history. He was already wanted for a misdemeanor, and now a DUI charge was added to his record. His actions had clearly endangered lives, making him a significant threat. Victor was taken to the hospital for treatment under police guard and was later transferred to the Sacramento County Jail. As police delved deeper into Victor's background, they grew increasingly suspicious. It was discovered that the car he had been driving was stolen, and the license plate did not match the vehicle's registration. A database check of the license plate revealed it belonged to a 2016 Ford, the same car recently found in a crime-ridden area of the city. That car was registered to a missing person named Raymond. From that point on, Victor became the prime suspect in Raymond's disappearance. More evidence was needed to establish Victor's involvement. Unfortunately, because the police were not immediately focused on pressing Victor for information, progress stalled. He continued to fabricate stories and insisted that he had no knowledge of Raymond or how Raymond's license plate ended up on his car. For 3 months, he refused to confess until a significant breakthrough occurred. In April, DNA analysis of a straw found in a soda cup at Raymond's home matched Victor's DNA, confirming that he had indeed been in Raymond's house. Furthermore, Raymond's younger brother, Dean Wright, also identified Victor. However, this evidence was still insufficient to file formal charges. The mystery of what happened to Raymond remained unsolved. Key evidence was hidden in the car Victor had crashed. On May 8, 2018, police searched the wreckage and discovered important items that shed light on Raymond's disappearance. Amid the clutter inside the car, they found a man's hat. Dean recognized the hat and confirmed it was identical to the one Raymond had worn. Raymond's wallet and glasses were also found in the car, along with a broken cell phone that appeared to have been intentionally destroyed. However, the serial number confirmed that the phone belonged to Raymond. More important evidence was collected from Victor's cell phone. At the end of the tense chase, the phone had been thrown deep into the car's cabin and was only discovered later. On the phone, there were photos of a location that had been sent to someone named Bob. These photos were taken on January 27, the same day as the police chase. In the messages, Victor expressed grievances and complaints directed at Bob. At the end of the messages, he stated that it was time to pay his debt and that he was expecting his money. A detailed analysis of Victor's phone also uncovered a conversation with a woman named Katie Bernard, who lived in a trailer near Raymond's carpentry shop. Victor had a brief conversation with her, trying to determine whether Raymond was alone in his shop or with someone else. It was clear that Victor knew Raymond. This conversation took place in the early morning of January 11, 2018. Geolocation data showed that Victor was only a few dozen meters away from Raymond's workshop at the time. Based on the messages, it appears that he was observing the workshop from outside. Victor contacted Katie to confirm whether Raymond was in the workshop during working hours. Katie left her house and went to see Raymond, exchanging a few words with him. She then confirmed that he was alone in the carpentry workshop. After returning home, she informed Victor that Raymond was indeed alone in the workshop. It is believed that after Katie provided this information, Victor acted and attacked Raymond just before 10 a.m. Police began to suspect that Katie might be an accomplice in the case. She was brought in for questioning in October 2018. The police immediately pressured her, as her correspondence with Victor was clear evidence of her involvement. Under pressure, Katie quickly confessed. Katie admitted that she had informed Victor that Raymond was in the workshop, but she was initially reluctant to assist in the investigation. Despite her reluctance, she became a key witness in solving the mystery of Raymond's disappearance. When asked about Bob, who was mentioned in Victor's messages, Katie revealed that he was Robert Manor, her ex-boyfriend, who was also in a relationship with Raymond. However, their relationship was far from friendly. In 2011, Raymond had been driving drunk and caused a car accident with an oncoming vehicle carrying Robert and his wife. The accident left Robert with a broken leg, requiring serious surgery. Even after treatment, Robert continued to limp and suffered from constant pain. Additionally, Robert was unhappy with the compensation he received for the accident. After the trial, Raymond was ordered to pay $275,000 in damages, but he was unable to pay the full amount at once. Raymond made monthly payments, often late, and never remitted large sums. The situation became more complicated when police ran a background check on Robert in their database. He had an extensive criminal record at the time of the incident. His primary activity was drug trafficking, which had landed him in prison on multiple occasions. Robert also had convictions for armed assault and robbery. He was clearly frustrated with Raymond's behavior and had long plotted revenge against him, whom he blamed for all the problems in his life. The constant pain he experienced served as a reminder of the accident, and his hatred and anger only grew over time. This eventually led to a carefully planned act of revenge. Katie explains that after becoming an informant for Victor, she discovered that the situation involved more than just a stolen car. She claims that she was unwittingly involved in Raymond's kidnapping and, out of fear of becoming the next target, chose to remain silent. Katie hesitantly reveals that Victor confided in her about what happened at the carpentry shop. After exchanging text messages with her, Victor armed himself and went to the shop. There, he struck Raymond on the head, knocking him unconscious. Victor then tied Raymond's hands and stuffed him into a pickup truck. He calmly drove through town to his house, located a few miles away. When Katie asked if he had killed Raymond, Victor grabbed her by the neck and warned her never to reveal their conversation. He threatened her but never disclosed what happened to Raymond. During the investigation, it was discovered that Katie was Robert's girlfriend. She was terrified of him, which made it difficult for the police to get her to talk. She knew he was dangerous and feared retaliation. Eventually, she admitted that she knew what had happened. However, Robert avoided providing details, saying only that he had taken care of everything he needed to do a long time ago. The police's main challenge was locating Raymond. Despite their best efforts, he was never found. In March 2021, Victor and Robert were charged with kidnapping and murder. However, both Victor and Robert denied any involvement in Raymond's case. They knew that admitting guilt would result in a life sentence without parole. Their lawyers argued that, since Raymond's body was never found and the case was based on circumstantial evidence, Victor and Robert could not be convicted of murder. The absence of a body allowed Victor and Robert to avoid punishment. From the start, the prosecutor's office faced several challenges, one of which was the credibility of the witnesses. Most of them had histories of drug use or legal trouble, which made their testimony questionable. Victor later admitted to kidnapping Raymond and handing him over to Robert but denied committing the murder. He revealed that his actions were motivated by a lack of payment. Victor claimed that Robert owed him $10,000 in cash for the job, but the money was never paid. The day Victor was being chased by the police for reckless driving, he drove a car full of evidence to confront Robert for cheating on him. Had Victor been paid, the confrontation might never have happened, and the criminals might have evaded justice. The trial began in March 2023, more than 5 years after Raymond went missing. Despite years of investigation, Raymond's body was never found. This made the trial particularly challenging, as proving guilt without a body was difficult for the prosecution. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys employed several strategies to influence the case. However, the prosecution had a key advantage: Katie Bernard, who agreed to testify against Robert and Victor in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Katie was not charged but played a key role in the case by providing a significant amount of incriminating evidence against Victor and Robert. Victor's confession was also crucial, as it revealed Robert's direct involvement in Raymond's disappearance and possible murder. Defense attorneys highlighted the lack of physical evidence, particularly the absence of a body. The trial lasted 1 day, and the jury deliberated for 4 hours before delivering its verdict on March 17, 2023. Both Victor Merle Gray and Robert Manor were convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Victor refused to address the press, Robert immediately denounced the verdict as a miscarriage of justice. To this day, Robert maintains his innocence, accusing Victor and Katie of conspiring to frame him. However, prosecutors dismissed this claim as false, arguing that only Robert had a motive for revenge. Victor had never met Raymond and thus had no reason to harm him. Raymond Wright's body has never been found, leaving his grieving family unable to give him a proper burial. Despite the tragedy, Raymond's daughters have shown resilience. Though deeply affected by the loss of their father, they have worked hard to rebuild their lives. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Judy Southern. Sometimes, from the very beginning of an investigation, everything seems to work out. The Supreme Court might directly point to a criminal, but practice shows that they are not always correct. While they tried to connect one person to the crime, the real culprit was walking free. Judy lived in Manhattan, New York, USA. She was a young woman who worked part-time at the post office. She always focused more on family and children than on career success. However, she wanted to get an education. Therefore, after graduating from high school, she entered college and successfully graduated. During this period, she met Alan Southern. They began a relationship and then got married. Judy and Alan lived together for more than 6 years. They raised a child together. From the outside, it seemed that everything was fine in their family, until one day that destroyed the entire family idyll. On June 7, 2000, Judy was in a good mood as she went to work in the morning, delivering mail around the area. At about 3:30 p.m., she returned home and, as always, found no one there yet. Judy arrived first and was getting ready for her husband to return from work. She had a 5-year-old son who was visiting his grandparents at that time. The boy was supposed to return in the evening. Once inside, Judy immediately noticed a strange mess on the kitchen table and found a suspicious note. She remembered that no one was there when she left for work. No one from the household could have come and left a message. Her husband was at work and never showed up during the day. Judy didn't have time to figure it all out, began to read the note, which turned out to have quite disturbing content. While she scanned the piece of paper, a stranger came out of a dark room and headed towards her, weapon at the ready. Without warning, he attacked her twice. The first bullet missed, but the second hit Judy in the lower abdomen. She fell to the floor and screamed in pain, losing consciousness. When she came to her senses, the attacker was nowhere to be seen. Judy barely reached the phone and tried to call her husband for help. But the phone was not working. She wanted to get to her mobile phone but could not remember where she left it. Fearing that the stranger might still be nearby, Judy crawled to the front door and carefully opened it. She stood up, leaning against the wall, left the house. Judy tried to attract the attention of others to scare off the criminal. She was bleeding and managed to walk only a couple of meters before she fell down exhausted. She knew her husband would be finishing work soon and would be near the house. That is exactly what happened. A few minutes later, he drove up in his car and immediately noticed his wife lying on the ground near the house. Judy was covered in blood but still alive. Alan picked her up and placed her in the back seat of the car. Judy was weak but tried to tell him about the attack. She pointed to the courtyard, but her husband still didn't understand what she wanted. There was no time to figure it out. Alan realized his wife's condition could be critical. Driving towards the hospital, Alan dialed 911, informed them that he had found his wife wounded near their house and was heading to the hospital. He asked them to meet them on the way. Judy was still conscious, said that a man had attacked her. She mentioned the name like Barry several times, claiming he had set up an ambush. By the time Judy arrived at the hospital, she had already lost consciousness. Doctors urgently took her to the operating room, but she died right on the table before receiving help. Her twin sister, Trudy Smith, arrived at the medical center a few minutes later. Alan informed her about the attack. She hurried because she wanted to support her sister. However, she doesn't have enough time. When Trudy received the tragic news of her sister's death, she approached Alan and accused him of what had happened. Alan seemed embarrassed. Trudy vowed to bring him to justice. The police immediately spoke to Alan, who became the main suspect. Because, typically, the closest people are involved in such cases. From the very beginning, Alan referenced Judy's own words about the shooting and the ambush organized by a certain Barry. The problem was that he did not know a single person among her acquaintances by that name. Trudy also could not recall anyone by that name. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the crime scene and managed to find a considerable amount of evidence confirming that someone had indeed set up an ambush there and spent a significant amount of time in the house waiting for the victim. Such persistence seemed to indicate hatred, anger, and a personal motive. This only confirmed to the detectives that the criminal should be sought among the victim's immediate surroundings. Nothing was stolen from the house, so the robbery theory was immediately excluded. Mysterious Barry had taken a shower, played video games, and even found an adult toy belonging to Judy. It is not known what he did with it or why he left it in a prominent place in the bedroom. It became why Judy could not call from home for help. It was impossible because the killer had cut the phone line. He clearly wanted to deprive the victim of any chance to survive, and it worked. Doctors were sure that with timely assistance, she could have been saved. Despite the fact that the shot did not kill her immediately and she was able to leave the house, there was no one to help her. Unfortunately, she had to wait for Alan to arrive for some time, during which she lost a lot of blood. The detectives discovered traces of Alan, her husband. He continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the ambush. There were cigarette butts lying everywhere in the house, suggesting that the killer had smoked more than a pack of cigarettes while waiting for Judy. During the investigation, it turned out that neither the victim herself nor her husband smoked that brand of cigarettes, although this was not strong evidence of his innocence. This became the first piece of evidence in favor of Alan's alibi. It was strange that the criminal had entered the house without breaking in. Alan believed that all the windows and doors should have been closed before he left for work, but the shooter could have escaped through the window, which was wide open. During the searches, Alan remembered that his wife sometimes left the kitchen window slightly open to air out the house. This change in testimony was perceived as a very alarming sign. Spent cartridges were found at the scene of the crime. The first bullet hit a wooden wall. Flax was collected for further examination, and the police tried their best to find the weapon, but it was all in vain. Now, locating it had become a priority. It was believed that Alan managed to dispose of the gun, and naturally, he did not confess to this. Everything seemed to be against Alan. He was the first to report the incident and had spent the last minutes of Judy's life with her. His entire car was covered in blood, as were his hands and clothes. When Alan's office was searched, even more suspicious evidence was found. A special device for recording calls was installed on the family's home phone. Thanks to it, Alan could listen to their conversations while at work, checking his suspicions. This immediately drew the attention of the authorities to Alan. This became a reason to increase pressure on him. The most curious piece of evidence was a note found at the scene, which appeared to be a suicide note, but not written by Judy or her husband. A new name also surfaced in this case, Jonathan. On the other hand, Alan and Judy had serious problems, which offered more reasons to commit a crime. The recordings of telephone conversations were linked to his attempts to catch his wife in infidelity. He planned to use all of this to gain an advantage in court during their pending divorce. As it turned out, both were unfaithful in their marriage. Alan had already had 2 mistresses, which Judy knew about. These affairs significantly contributed to the collapse of their marriage. At the time of the attack, Judy also had a lover. They contacted him, but the man's name was not Jonathan, and he did not appear to look like a killer from the beginning. All suspicions were removed when he provided a reliable alibi. Just 2 days before her death, Judy had called and complained about problems in the marriage, mentioning that they were even sleeping in different rooms, that for over a month, nothing had kept them together except for their 5-year-old son, Jacob. Judy had long wanted to file for divorce but saw how well her child was with his father and did not want to ruin that bond. Alan truly played a significant role in Jacob's life. However, this no longer mattered against the backdrop of constant quarrels. Judy could no longer tolerate the conflicts and was planning to file for divorce. It is obvious that this gave Alan more reasons for anger. He could have been jealous of her, fearing that he would lose his son or be forced to share custody or pay alimony. Trudy confirmed that they indeed had disputes about their child, and both wanted to obtain custody rights, making the divorce process expectedly difficult. Trudy, too, had reason to confront Alan with accusations right in the medical center. However, the most compelling and disturbing arguments for the investigation came from Judy's friends. Everyone knew that Judy had serious marital problems, but the situation was worse than it seemed. Judy had repeatedly stated that if something happened to her, Alan would definitely be guilty. The possibility of financial motives for the crime also emerged. As their relationship began to crumble, Alan could solve all his problems at once and gain some benefit. This turned out to be true because a life insurance policy for Judy was found during the investigation, with her husband and son as the beneficiaries. Of course, Alan denied everything. He was interrogated for hours, but he insisted that under no circumstances would he kill the mother of his child. He claimed that he loved his son too much to deprive him of the most valuable person in his son's life. According to the investigation, there was not enough evidence to bring charges. More material evidence was needed. At a minimum, it was necessary to wait for the results of all the examinations. Contrary to the detective's expectations, doubts about the correctness of the choice of the main suspect arose with the first reports. The note found in the courtyard of the Southern house, identified as a suicide note, was signed by a certain Jonathan. However, the handwriting was not very legible, and the note itself was slightly contaminated with the blood of Judy. Complicating matters, it was clear that the note was addressed to a woman named Melanie and the letter was addressed to my wife, Melanie. At first, this confusion deepened because Melanie Southern did not exist, but there were other details in the letter, including an address that matched with Melanie Binney. This young woman lived at the location indicated in the note. She had a daughter and a husband named Jonathan Binney. The Binney family home was located approximately 5 kilometers from the ambush site where Judy was found. When the police checked Jonathan Binney in their database, it turned out that he fit the profile of the killer, as he had previously encountered problems with the law. Until recently, Jonathan had committed only minor offenses, but he was now under investigation for something far more serious. Shortly before Judy's death, he had abused his 3-month-old daughter. Initially, detectives believed that this note could have been written by Alan to mislead them and remove suspicion from himself. However, this clue needed proper analysis. In the suicide letter, Jonathan indicated that he wanted to leave this life voluntarily because he could not imagine being imprisoned for abusing a child. This all appeared suspicious when the detectives arrived at his house, where they found only his wife, Melanie. She admitted that he had not lived there since her statement about the child abuse case. Melanie was very angry with Jonathan. When she found out what happened to the Southern family, she was shocked because, in her opinion, Jonathan did not look like a killer, although she was no longer sure of anything. She was amazed at how close she had let a true madman, capable of such atrocities, into her life. She told the police where Jonathan could be, and the detectives arrived at the specified address. But even there, the suspect could not be found. Investigators contacted his close friends, but they also did not know where he could be. In the media, an alert was issued that a dangerous criminal was on the run, and they believed he could not have gone far. Additionally, considering the suicide note, they expected to find his lifeless body sooner. Tracking him down, the police used K-9 units with specially trained dogs and aerial support from police helicopters. The search took nearly a day until finally the dogs led the police to the basement of a house. There, Jonathan was found lying on the floor, shirtless, with 6 nicotine patches stuck to his chest. He was alive. The man told the police that he had attempted to take his own life by overdosing on nicotine. This was probably meant to convince everyone that he felt remorseful. Jonathan did not resist when he was arrested. He even seemed a little glad that it was all finally over. At the time of the crime, Jonathan Binney was 26 years old. His behavior raised doubts about his mental stability. Some suspected he might have mental issues. However, a psychiatric examination indicated that he was aware of his actions both during and after the crime. This led investigators to suspect that he was merely trying to elicit sympathy with his threats. Melanie provided detectives with writing samples that were analyzed by a handwriting expert. The expert found several significant characteristics that distinguished Jonathan's handwriting. He noted the similarity in the spelling of the lowercase g and f in the suicide note and in the samples. According to the analysis, there was almost a 100% probability that this letter was written by Jonathan himself. After this conclusion, the case against Alan began to collapse. Prior to Jonathan's arrest, the police had offered Alan a polygraph test. He agreed and passed with flying colors, which should have strengthened their confidence in his innocence, but they did not want to let him go. Alan was kept under suspicion until Jonathan confessed to attacking Judy, making it clear that Alan had no involvement in the crime. Allen was subsequently released. Another key piece of evidence was the DNA found on the toy in the house. The expert used dozens of filters to collect particles of saliva and skin from the killer, which also matched Jonathan's profile. This linked him to the crime scene. The day before Jonathan was arrested, the police found a 9mm handgun, a significant discovery. Despite a thorough search, they did not find this 9mm handgun registered to Allen. The gun was later confiscated and examined, but ballistics tests showed that it was not the weapon used to kill Judy. However, a dog team found another gun of the appropriate caliber in the woods near the house. Ballistics experts were now able to compare the bullets, cartridges, and guns. Tests were conducted. The markings on the bullets were then compared to objects from the scene of the massacre. The tests allowed investigators to prove that Judy was shot with this pistol. Fingerprints were found on the handle of the pistol, which also led to the arrest of a child abuser, Jonathan. During the search of Jonathan's house, police managed to find 9mm Cobra cartridges for a concealed carry pistol on the body under his clothing, as well as other evidence. All this confirmed that Jonathan was the weapon's owner. Melanie also told the police that he always carried a weapon with him, which he bought for self-defense. However, this had little effect on the situation with Allen. Even after that, he still looked suspicious. There were too many doubts against him because of the existing motive. Therefore, his status changed. It was now believed that he did not kill his wife with his own hands but became the mastermind behind the murder, using Jonathan as the executor. However, he refused to admit he didn't even know Jonathan. The theory that Allen hired Jonathan to kill his wife was also carefully investigated for a long time. The correspondence and calls were analyzed, but no connection leading Judy to Jonathan could be found. It seemed they were not acquainted at all. Against this backdrop, authorities tried to find at least some connection between the criminal and his victim in order to understand the motive for the attack. For a long time, it was thought this would help uncover Allen's involvement in the crime. It seemed suspicious that Judy called out a similar name before her death. Perhaps she really knew him or was trying to say something else, but her husband did not hear. The closest tie the police found was the period when Jonathan worked as a security guard at the library, where Judy occasionally borrowed books. They both had membership cards for the institution and exchanged pleasantries with each other. However, when questioned, the employees of the library could not remember any incidents involving Jonathan. The staff described Jonathan as a somewhat strange young man. While he worked as a security guard, he had no problems in his service record, at least none were known at his workplace. In fact, during this period, Jonathan had only minor offenses. When they questioned him about his job at the library, he could not recall anything that might connect him to Judy. Eventually, the detectives were forced to admit that this murder was a spontaneous act of aggression against an unknown person and a coincidence with Allen. All suspicions against Allen were dismissed. Jonathan was not familiar with Judy Southern. The choice of victim was random. He was merely driving around the city on his moped, looking for a suitable house to ambush. The Southern house seemed ideal to him, primarily because he spotted an open window that allowed for easy entry. Once inside the house, Jonathan clearly envisioned his actions. He had no specific target and was prepared to shoot whomever entered first, aiming to harm an innocent person. He smoked to ease his nerves. When it became he'd have to wait, he played video games and rummaged through the rooms. He never commented on Judy's abandoned adult toy. When Jonathan discovered that Judy had a husband and a 5-year-old son at the time, he claimed he would have shot any of them without discrimination or hesitation, even a child, if they had entered the house. Jonathan also confessed to abusing a 3-month-old child. Due to the ongoing investigation, he later told the authorities that he did not want to go to jail for child abuse, especially considering the familial ties and age of the victim. He was aware of how badly prisoners with such convictions were treated and described in detail the suffering caused by his fear of incarceration. Therefore, he sought a way to remedy the situation. Jonathan decided to go to jail as a murderer. He likely did not realize that he would be tried for both crimes and face 2 sentences, making it impossible to entirely hide his dark past. While in the ambush house, Jonathan altered his plan and decided to take his own life after committing the murder, so he didn't particularly care about leaving evidence. With these thoughts, he even wrote a suicide note. He spent several days behind bars and eventually told the police, without waiting for his lawyer, that he wanted to officially plead guilty to Judy's murder. Jonathan was not planning to deny his guilt regarding the abuse of a 3-month-old. His conscience was eating away at him, and he was ready to talk to detectives again. The entire local community was shocked by what had happened, especially Melanie, who had already suffered greatly. The media eagerly reported that a 3-month-old baby had been abused by her own father. Authorities feared public unrest and felt compelled to provide increased protection for the criminal. When Melanie learned that her husband was willing to kill any person, even a child, to avoid jail time for his shameful crime, she desperately wanted him imprisoned forever, or better yet, sentenced to death, so that this bloody chaos would end as soon as possible. Given the evidence collected, even without a confession, Jonathan Binney faced little chance of receiving a lenient sentence. He was found guilty of murdering Judy Southern and abusing a baby, receiving the highest punishment before being placed on death row. The court's decision elicited strong reactions from both the killer's wife and the family of the deceased, who finally breathed a sigh of relief and continued to raise their children. Jonathan's lawyer fought for a temporary reprieve, even managing to secure one at first, and subsequently signed a written agreement with the authorities stating that he would never again appeal the sentence if the death penalty were commuted to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. This agreement worked. Jonathan Binney is now serving a life sentence and remains behind bars. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Natalie Henderson. In 2016, Natalie Henderson celebrated her 17th birthday. She lived in Roswell, while her friend Carter Davis, also 17, was from nearby Woodstock. Although they both attended high school, they attended different schools. For 3 years, Natalie was part of the custodial team at her school, motivated by her aspirations of becoming a lifeguard. Friends described Natalie as cheerful, outgoing, engaging, and confident. She was an active young woman who loved to sing and play the guitar, and she spent hundreds of hours volunteering to help animals. Carter Davis volunteered at a local animal shelter and was a member of both the football and lacrosse teams at his school. Coaches often praised his athletic abilities and encouraged him to play in college. With his energetic and cheerful personality, he was known for always smiling and encouraging his teammates, especially when they faced challenges. Both teenagers had promising futures ahead of them, but tragically, their lives came to an abrupt end one day. At around 6 a.m. on Monday, August 1, 2016, a delivery driver arrived at a supermarket to unload his groceries. However, he noticed something unusual. To reach the unloading area, he had to go around 2 cars parked oddly in the square, which was strange, as there had never been any cars or strangers there before. As he approached, he saw 2 bodies lying motionless on the pavement, surrounded by blood. Panicked, he immediately called emergency services. When the police arrived, they quickly identified the victims as 17-year-old Natalie Henderson and her friend Carter Davis. Both had been shot in the head, and Natalie was found wearing nothing, raising suspicions that she may have been abused. The crime scene indicated a homicide, with no signs of a struggle or weapons nearby. It appeared that the young victims had been shot unexpectedly. The area was secured, and forensic experts began their investigation. The teens were due to return to school in just over a month. However, instead of focusing on their senior year, their parents had to prepare for their funerals. Both schools that Natalie and Carter attended announced a day of mourning and held a fundraiser to support their families. The news of their deaths shocked everyone who knew them, as well as the residents of this quiet town. Natalie and Carter were active, friendly young people who volunteered and participated in sports. they had no known enemies or critics. On the day the bodies were found, 2 candlelight vigils were held in loving memory of the deceased, with hopes that the police would quickly apprehend the person responsible for such a horrific act. In their grief, the city's residents were in a state of panic. They did not know what to think or whether a dangerous criminal could strike again. The media circulated rumors and inaccurate information from the police, which only added to the public's anxiety. The police concluded that Natalie and Carter had been in a secluded area behind the supermarket between 2 and 3 a.m., just hours before their bodies were discovered by a motorist. The condition of the bodies and initial signs from the autopsy supported this time frame. Their parents believed the young couple had been home and asleep, raising the question of why they were in that area so late at night. After interviewing Natalie and Carter's friends, the police learned that they had run away to meet each other. They had been in a relationship but kept it a secret because they feared their families would disapprove due to their young age. As a result, they would meet in isolated locations in the evenings and at night. A witness who had passed by the supermarket about 30 minutes before the bodies were found reported that he had not noticed anything unusual at the time. He did not provide specific details and admitted that he may have missed important information due to the darkness. To gather more information, he contacted the public. The most interesting point was the time between 2 and 3 in the morning, which could greatly assist the investigation. Surveillance camera footage from the crime scene was available, with several recordings made at the same time. The area is usually busy only during business hours, and there is very little activity at night. It was clear that the video cameras were essential for safety, as the isolated and dark street was an ideal location for crime. The police noted that the location could attract young people, and nearby 24-hour restaurants were also considered potential meeting places. Several popular establishments were in the vicinity, including a well-known steakhouse. The police requested footage from these restaurants and began analyzing the recordings. However, they were unable to find any teenagers in the footage from inside these establishments. This suggests that Natalie and Carter were not there to eat but simply to spend some private time together. They posed no threat to anyone and were in a secluded area. Therefore, they may have been victims of random violence or involved in something more sinister. The family stated that the victims had no legal problems and were not involved in any suspicious groups related to alcohol or illegal drugs. They were not engaged in any business activities, and Natalie even volunteered to help teenagers struggling with addiction. The police were certain that the victims were not killed elsewhere, as they found no evidence that they had been dragged or transported in a vehicle. Initially, the police focused on drugs as a possible motive. This idea gained public support because the abandoned area around the supermarket appeared to be a hotbed of illegal activity. However, after 2 days, this theory was dismissed. Surveillance footage from the supermarket helped police identify the killer, described as a thin man with long, unkempt hair. Unfortunately, the footage did not capture his face or license plate number. However, the police were able to identify the suspect before Natalie and Carter's funerals. Police investigated and found that the suspect had used Natalie's debit card at a store near her home and at a gas station. Surveillance cameras captured him, and his cell phone's geolocation data was examined. He was actually near the supermarket at the time of the double murder. Police identified and arrested the suspect, 20-year-old Jeffrey Hazelwood, just a few miles from the crime scene. Initially, police were unsure of Jeffrey's motives, but they believed he acted alone. Multiple government agencies, including the FBI, were involved in the investigation. At around 5 a.m., police arrested Jeffrey at a gas station without any resistance. At the time, Jeffrey lived with his maternal grandparents, who adopted him when he was very young. Little is known about him, making it important to understand what might have driven him to kill Natalie and Carter. He was found to be an active social media user, with police and psychologists noting signs of internal struggles in his posts. The evening before the double murder, he shared a caption photo that read, "Always remember that you are unique, completely unique like everyone else." Some of his posts also contained darker themes and expressed thoughts of ending his life. Jeffrey's grandparents mentioned that he had been in legal trouble for years. A year earlier, he had been sent to a special academy for troubled youth due to his criminal activities. He was involved in a gang, and his grandparents reported that Jeffrey sometimes acted out to the point where they feared for their safety. Jeffrey's mother had separated from his biological father before he was born. During her pregnancy, she used illegal drugs, which negatively affected Jeffrey. From the beginning, she paid little attention to him and essentially abandoned him. As a result, he was sent to live with his grandparents, who lived near the site of the double murder. They were very religious and cared for Jeffrey as best they could, but he did not behave like a devoted grandson. Jeffrey's mother was ordered to pay $40 a week in child support, but she skipped the payments. This led her parents to take legal action, claiming that she owed over $12,000 in child support when Jeffrey was only 9 years old. Eventually, Jeffrey's mother began to care for her son and visited him twice a month. They attempted to set up a time to meet to help her learn how to care for a child, hoping to reunite and allow her to take on a more active parenting role in the future. However, according to Jeffrey's grandparents, he continued to have ongoing problems. In March 2011, Jeffrey failed to report to the police when he was under supervision. His maternal grandparents provided police with a note from Jeffrey stating that he planned to go into the wilderness to survive for a few days. However, he was carrying a 9mm pistol. After a few months, the police decided not to pursue the case further. Eventually, another family conflict arose. Jeffrey ran away again after several days of inappropriate behavior. After his arrest, he promised to behave, but a few months later, he was reported again for swinging a sword in his yard. When the police arrived, Jeffrey explained that he was practicing karate and was doing so outside behind a fence to avoid hurting anyone. However, his maternal grandparents told the police that Jeffrey was behaving inappropriately and posed a danger. Unfortunately, there was still no way to prove any malicious intent. In April 2013, Jeffrey's grandmother contacted the police again, reporting that about 6 weeks earlier, Jeffrey had threatened to blow up a building. Initially, the police did not take these threats seriously, but it soon became clear that the boy was preparing for something. Jeffrey's grandmother became suspicious when she discovered a sword and several knives on him. In February 2015, Jeffrey was charged with weapon theft. It is important to note that until the end, Jeffrey had not shown any aggression toward others and had not harmed his grandparents or strangers. Therefore, the violent actions that led to the deaths of Natalie and Carter shocked the boy's family. After the incident, one of Jeffrey's close friends spoke to the police, explaining that the boy was not a bad person by nature but had struggled with mental illness for many years. These mental health issues contributed to the tragic attack on the loving couple. Although Jeffrey was generally a caring and loving person, he changed dramatically when he began hearing voices in his head. Jeffrey often shared his struggles with a close friend. His issues began in elementary school and led to behavioral problems in high school. It got so bad that he was homeschooled and barely attended school during those years. About 4 months before the shooting, Jeffrey received a diagnosis indicating that he suffered from schizophrenia and other mental health issues. Although he had been on medication for a while, he stopped shortly before the incident, believing that he was getting better and no longer needed help. Sadly, he lost control, leading to the shooting of a stranger. The police worked tirelessly for nearly 2 days to gather details about the horrific crime. Their efforts led to charges being filed, and the trial began just 1 day after Jeffrey was arrested. The results of the forensic examination shed more light on the massacre. Forensic experts found no traces of male fluids on Natalie's body, but some of the injuries raised concerns about possible abuse. Natalie was shot at close range, while Carter was shot at medium range on the left side of the head. The murder weapon was never found. Before the hearing, Jeffrey claimed that he was not involved in the massacre but was merely a witness. He stated that he did not see the attacker but observed the events as they occurred. He mentioned that the girl was worth nothing when she got out of the car and that the attacker then killed them. After the shooting, the attacker took valuables from the car and the girl's purse. However, Jeffrey's testimony did not match the evidence, as surveillance camera footage revealed the actual details of the crime. Later, during a second interview, Jeffrey changed his story. He claimed that a stranger behind the supermarket was responsible. He alleged that this stranger threatened Natalie and Carter with a weapon and forced them out of the car. Jeffrey stated that he had a brief conversation with Carter before the shooting began. He claimed that the girl exited the car at the attacker's request, who then assaulted her on the hood before shooting her. However, this version was also deemed implausible, as police knew that no one else was involved. It was all Jeffrey himself, as shown in the video. During a third interview, Jeffrey confessed to the truth of the events. He admitted to committing all the crimes he had previously mentioned. New information came to light, indicating that he forced the couple out of the car while they were partially undressed. He shot Carter first, then forced Natalie to remove her shirt and underwear. He abused her on the hood of his car before killing her. According to him, he killed Carter first because he thought the young man was strong and capable of defending himself. It is unclear why Jeffrey committed the crime. He stated that he had moved out of his grandparents' house a few days earlier after being expelled from school due to his erratic behavior. He took his belongings, including the clothes he wore during the murder, which were later found hidden at his girlfriend's house, where he had been staying before the incident. Jeffrey's diary contained disturbing entries, including frightening thoughts about killing. His grandparents expressed fear for him. Just before the tragedy, he had mentioned end-life thoughts and a desire to harm others. Based on the evidence gathered, the prosecutor's office filed 12 charges against Jeffrey, including aggravated double murder, abuse, burglary, and illegal possession of a weapon. During the trial, Jeffrey appeared disheveled and unwell. His long hair partially obscured his face, and bystanders observed him mumbling to himself. His behavior became increasingly erratic, with footage showing him fondling an imaginary object on his leg. After a preliminary hearing, Jeffrey was denied bail. His attorney described him as extremely frightened and said he did not fully understand what was happening. The attorney, who took on the case pro bono, believes that everyone deserves legal representation. The defense focused primarily on Jeffrey's mental health, as independent experts had diagnosed him with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. The preliminary hearing was originally scheduled for September 9th but was postponed to October 28th. The prosecutor's office intends to pursue the death penalty for the double murder. When Jeffrey appeared in court, he reported that he had not been given his psychiatric medication while in prison. He claimed that he had repeatedly contacted the medical team for medication but had been ignored. The hearing was adjourned again, this time to February of the following year. While Jeffrey appeared unwell during the preliminary hearing, he told the jury otherwise. Jeffrey had been hearing voices for a long time. Some of these voices sounded like demons, while others sounded like friends. He believed he was receiving messages from God through the television and felt as though he was being watched through the walls. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a mental illness that includes symptoms of both schizophrenia and mood disorders, and usually appears during adolescence. Jeffrey also had a long history of mental health problems. In 2001, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. He struggled with anger management, which led to multiple hospitalizations in 2012 and 2013. With the help of appropriate medication, Jeffrey was able to appear in court and eventually grasp the proceedings. His doctor testified in court that Jeffrey experienced voices, hallucinations, and paranoia. Given the circumstances, Jeffrey pleaded guilty by reason of insanity, arguing that he was not in control of his actions when he attacked the two young men. The parents of the victims shared that even in their short lives, Natalie and Carter made a significant impact by dedicating their time to helping others, in stark contrast to their killer. While in prison awaiting trial, Jeffrey attempted to write letters of apology to the victims' families several times. However, he was only able to do so after his health improved with medication. The jury ultimately found him guilty, and Jeffrey Haywood received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Lauren Hugelmayer. Lauren Hugelmayer was born on June 9, 1988, in Los Angeles County, California. She was one of 3 daughters of Dale and Lori. Lauren grew up in a close-knit religious family that regularly attended their local church and was well loved in the community. She developed a reputation for being exceptionally kind, caring, known for her bright smile and vibrant personality. Lauren had a close bond with her older sister Beth, but she was even closer to her father, with whom she shared a trusting relationship. While in high school, Lauren met a classmate named Matthew Phelps, who would later play an important role in her life. At that time, it was unclear whether they were just acquaintances or had a closer relationship. After Lauren's family moved to North Carolina, Matthew transferred to another school, which interrupted their connection. After graduating from high school, Lauren chose to attend Appalachian State University, where she earned a degree in business administration and management in 2011. In 2014, Lauren received a direct message on Instagram from Matthew. While Lauren had a stable life, Matthew lived in Kent and faced significant challenges. His father was completely absent, and his mother had remarried several times. Matthew struggled to connect with any of his stepfathers. This lack of parental attention contributed to behavioral problems in his life. During high school, Matthew fell in with a bad crowd, began abusing alcohol and banned substance, particularly cough syrup, which is often misused for its psychoactive effects. His substance abuse became increasingly obvious, and his grades suffered as a result. In response, his grandparents decided to transfer him from public high school to a private Christian academy, hoping this change would help him turn his life around. Eventually, this decision paid off. Matthew improved his academic performance and distanced himself from negative influences. After graduating, he chose to enroll in a Baptist university with the goal of becoming a pastor. Although he later abandoned this ambition. Let's return to his online reunion with Lauren. Matthew and Lauren started talking to learn more about each other. They quickly discovered they had many shared interests, including being big fans of Star Wars and Harry Potter. They also connected through their strong Christian faith and then their desire to build a family together. As their conversations continued, they transitioned from chatting online to nearly daily phone calls. A few months later, they decided to enter a long-distance relationship. Their bond grew stronger, and Matthew made an effort to visit Lauren whenever possible. Eventually, he chose to move to North Carolina to be closer to her to deepen their relationship. Lauren was thrilled by this decision because she had always dreamed of finding someone with whom she could create a strong family. Most of Lauren's family welcomed Matthew, particularly her mother, who treated him like another son and tried to introduce him to the family. However, things were not as easy with Lauren's father, Dale. He seemed reluctant to accept Matthew as part of the family and often avoided him, though the reasons for this were unclear. It might have just been a feeling. Despite this, Lauren's family made efforts to help Matthew feel more comfortable, and they eventually invited him to a family dinner. That night, while playing games and talking, Matthew surprised everyone by confessing that he was married before he got into a relationship with Lauren, but his marriage had ended. He did not provide any reasons for his divorce, which raised concerns for Dale. Dale felt that Matthew's refusal to explain might indicate that he had done something wrong, making Dale worry about his daughter's future. However, Lauren and the rest of the family seemed unconcerned about this issue. It was puzzling because despite their strong traditional values, none of them questioned Matthew's honesty or character. Lauren and Matthew continued their relationship. In 2015, they decided to get engaged. On November 11, 2016, they finally got married and hosted a big celebration. The wedding was a success, and since they were both fans of Star Wars, they chose this theme for the celebration. However, there was one unpleasant incident. Matthew's mother wore white to the wedding. despite being told that it was inappropriate. This suggested that she did not approve of Lauren. Additionally, Lauren's family found Matthew's mother rude and unpleasant. Dale expressed his discontent with the wedding due to lingering doubts about his son-in-law. He tried to suppress these feelings to avoid ruining his daughter's special day. After the wedding, Lauren and Matthew appeared very happy, with Lauren frequently posting pictures of herself and Matthew on social media, suggesting they had a perfect relationship. However, behind the scenes, their situation was more complicated. Matthew's coldness and contradictions began to show, revealing his true character. Their different childhood experiences turned them into different individuals. They both had what could be said to be different views on life, so problems began to arise. Additionally, Matthew's mother's rude behavior toward Lauren worsened the situation. For reasons unknown, she excluded Lauren from the family and often made her feel unwelcome. At that time, Lauren was independent and responsible, she even juggling 3 jobs because of her love for children. She volunteered at a children's Sunday school, worked as an auditor for a pharmaceutical company, and sold scented candles, which she enjoyed. Lauren also formed strong friendships with her colleagues, who appreciated her kindness and empathy. Lauren's dreams and plans were tragically shattered in the early hours of September 1, 2017. At midnight, emergency services received a distressing call from a man who sounded confused and embarrassed. He reported, "I turned on the light and saw her lying dead on the floor, and I have blood on me. There's a bloody knife on the bed, and I think I did it. I can't believe it. I'm right next to her." This man was Lauren's husband, Matthew. Matthew claimed he couldn't remember anything. He explained that before going to bed, he had taken a lot of cough syrup, which he believed caused him to commit this terrible act. When the police arrived, they found that Lauren was still alive. They rushed her to the hospital, however, despite their efforts, she sadly succumbed to her injuries and blood loss before reaching the hospital. When investigators examined the scene, they noticed it appeared too orderly, almost as if it had been staged. The knife was neatly placed on the bed, and the syrup was prominently displayed on the table, matching the details provided in the emergency call. However, they were surprised to find very little blood on Matthew, only a few drops on his shirt and shoes. This led them to suspect that an attempt had been made to clean up the scene before the emergency was reported, indicating that something more complicated was happening. Police believe it was not an accident. Additionally, the police noted Matthew's unusual behavior. He appeared calm despite expressing sadness over his wife's death. This made Matthew the prime suspect in the case, and he was eventually arrested. Authorities confiscated mobile phones, computers, documents, and journals containing Matthew's notes for investigation. A blood sample was also taken for toxicology tests. Investigators faced the difficult task of informing Lauren's family about these developments, leaving them devastated. An autopsy revealed that Lauren had suffered 123 stab and cut wounds. This raised the question, could an over-the-counter cough syrup turn a loving husband into a murderer? The syrup contains 2 active ingredients. Some believe that taking it in high doses can lead to euphoria, agitation, psychosis, and destructive behavior. To address these concerns, the product's manufacturer issued a statement expressing condolences to Lauren's family while also confirming that there was no evidence linking the syrup to violent behavior. Additionally, toxicology tests on Matthew showed that, although the syrup was detected in his blood, the dosage was not high enough to impact his mental state. Therefore, his claim that he was intoxicated by syrup when he attacked his wife was dismissed. The investigators aimed to understand what led Matthew to commit this act, so they conducted a detailed investigation, gathering information from family and friends. They discovered that Lauren and Matthew's relationship was not as ideal as it appeared in photos. Shortly after their wedding, they began experiencing various issues. Lauren was very independent and hardworking. In contrast, Matthew had a different attitude toward work. He was not motivated to work and often struggled to find or keep a job. Whenever he started a new job, he would quickly quit without explanation. Additionally, Matthew had a problem with overspending, particularly on unnecessary items like game consoles, video games, and online gaming subscriptions. Lauren and Matthew had a savings account for a trip to Disney. However, Matthew spent all the money without Lauren's consent or knowledge, even taking money from her purse, which amounted to stealing. This behavior caused frequent arguments between them. His excessive spending led to financial problems, which the Hugelmayer family recognized. Their relationship became increasingly strained, so Lauren expressed to family and friends that she might leave if things didn't improve. When asked why she hadn't taken that step, she cited her religious belief that everyone can be redeemed if they have faith. This belief motivated her to give her marriage a chance, but in reality, she found it difficult to tolerate her husband's behavior. Friends of Lauren reported that Matthew was controlling and jealous. He wrongly accused Lauren of having an affair with a church friend, despite there being no evidence to back this claim. Matthew had an irrational fear that Lauren would leave him, which stemmed from his previous marriage. He revealed to her that he divorced his first wife because she had been unfaithful, cheating on him with a church staff member. This experience left him in constant fear of abandonment. However, Matthew's behavior was inconsistent. He became very close to a neighbor and spent a lot of time with her. Even though he denied any romantic involvement, Lauren was convinced he was cheating on her with this neighbor. Despite her accusations, Matthew continued to see the woman. During police questioning, the neighbor claimed that their relationship was purely platonic. She explained that they connected because both were dealing with depression and anxiety. However, she noticed that Matthew had begun to discuss painful subjects, mostly related to death, prompting her to limit their interactions. At one point, Matthew claimed he had decided to return to college to pursue his dream of becoming a pastor, in an effort to win back Lauren's trust and save their relationship. Lauren reacted positively to this news. However, as time went on, their situation did not improve. Lauren's relatives observed that she had been in a very bad state and was no longer as happy as she used to be. They felt guilty for not intervening sooner. Lauren's older sister, Beth, made a significant statement. She recounted a phone call with Lauren the night before, during which Lauren was cooking dinner. During that call, the neighbor knocked on the door looking for Matthew. Without hesitation, Matthew left with the neighbor, leaving Lauren's dinner untouched. Beth expressed her frustration, saying she could no longer accept the situation and was convinced Matthew was cheating on Lauren, leading Lauren to decide to leave him. As the police gathered more evidence, the motive behind Lauren's death became clearer. The authorities conducted a detailed investigation of the apartment and confirmed their initial suspicions: Matthew had cleaned up before calling emergency services. Detectives also found what appeared to be an intimate diary of Matthew. This diary contained notes about his arguments with Lauren, his struggles with low self-esteem, and his feelings of insecurity in their marriage, especially since he knew her family had never accepted him. When experts examined Matthew's mobile phone, they discovered troubling search queries in his history. These included questions about the dangers of cough syrup and its effects on consciousness. This strongly suggested two things: first, that the attack was premeditated, and second, that Matthew was trying to mislead the authorities into thinking he was unaware of killing his wife while under the influence of the syrup. An important detail uncovered through Matthew's mobile phone revealed that just hours before he killed his wife, they had a heated argument through text messages and calls. Matthew claimed that Lauren accused him of cheating and expressed her desire to end their marriage, sufficient reason for a troubled mind to decide to kill his wife. Additionally, police discovered a secret Instagram account belonging to Matthew Under. The profile picture featured a character from the movie American Psycho, which is about a serial killer. His posts were filled with screenshots from the movie, and he even shared photos of himself dressed as one of its characters. Moreover, his posts contained themes that were completely contrary to Christian values, despite his self-identification as a believer. The last post was made just days before Lauren's murder and included disturbing photos of himself with a caption that read, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer," along with the hashtag "I found an angel that needs to be killed." Matthew's friend shared that he once expressed a fascination with killing, suggesting that taking a life would be a true joy. This troubling revelation paints a stark picture of Matthew, especially in light of statements made by his first wife concerning their separation. She revealed that their relationship, initially filled with common interests, deteriorated after marriage. Matthew began to overspend and failed to contribute financially. More alarmingly, he became abusive, often pulling her out of bed, throwing her to the floor, and assaulting her during his rages. This behavior left she terrified, leading her to seek a divorce. Her experience closely mirrors that of Lauren. During the trial, the defense argued that Matthew was not in his right mind during the crime and was likely suffering from instability and depression, worsened by substance use. They presented letters from Matthew's friends and colleagues to the court, claiming that his actions were out of character and that he was not a violent person. The trial occurred in October 2018. Although Matthew initially pleaded not guilty, he later accepted a plea agreement. On October 5, the judge found him guilty of first-degree involuntary manslaughter and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lauren's family is still deeply affected by her absence and feels guilty for not stopping her relationship. To honor her memory, they created a foundation focused on raising awareness about abusive relationships and domestic violence. Matthew Phelps was a manipulative person who only cared about his own needs, disguising himself as someone harmless. Sadly, Lauren's compassion blinded her to his true nature, and it may have only been in her final moments that she understood his true character. Unfortunately, there are many individuals like him who can deceive others with ease. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ashley Dale. On a summer night in 2022, an innocent woman fell victim in Liverpool's Old Swan district, just a few miles from the city centre. At 12:41 a.m. on August 21, 2022, police received a call from a neighbor reporting a violent situation taking place next door. When the police arrived, the house was eerily quiet, with the front door clearly broken open, suggesting that a violent incident had occurred. The back door leading to the garden was left ajar. As the police cautiously entered the garden, they discovered the body of a woman. Just a few meters away, her mobile phone appeared to have slipped from her hand in her final moments. They quickly understood the gravity of the situation when they found a number of spent bullet casings scattered around the house. While one officer was investigating the crime scene, other officers arrived, waking several neighbors with the noise. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots coming from the house, while others said they heard screeching tires and car alarms going off hours before the incident. The tragic event left everyone in the area shocked. Neighbors helped the police identify the victim as 28-year-old Ashley Dale. Ashley grew up in a close-knit family and was the oldest of 3 siblings. In 2015, her younger brother was mistakenly murdered by a gang at the age of 16. Ashley was deeply affected by the death of her younger brother, which changed her outlook on life. However, she persevered, using her grief as motivation to study and eventually earn a degree in environmental conservation. This achievement led to a fulfilling career as an environmental conservationist, where she thrived and earned the respect of her colleagues. They admired not only her dedication to her work but also her genuine compassion for those around her. In her role, Ashley focused on various projects to improve living conditions and public health in the city, establishing herself as a hardworking, intelligent, and goal-oriented person. In her personal life, Ashley Dale cherished time with her family, friends, and dog. Her loved ones described her as intelligent, kind, and caring. Despite her difficult past and the pain of losing a loved one, she moved forward with determination and succeeded in her path. However, things became more complicated when she started dating Lee Harrison, a man with deep ties to the criminal world. His connections to gangs caused serious concerns for Ashley's family, who feared for her safety. Although Ashley believed that Lee was gradually changing, she still trusted him. Lee Harrison, a 28-year-old man from Liverpool, was deeply involved with many gangs and banned substance trafficking. He was particularly close to Neil Berry, a local banned substance dealer. However, their friendship began to decline in 2018 due to issues related to banned substance and trust. That year, Neil was robbed of $50,000 worth of banned substance hidden in his home in an incident orchestrated by a rival gang. Neil suspected that Lee Harrison may have informed his rivals about the incident. Although Lee denied any wrongdoing, their relationship soured, turning them into enemies. In June 2022, Lee Harrison and Ashley Dale bumped into each other at the Glastonbury Festival, rekindling old feelings. However, they also encountered a member of Neil's gang, leading to a violent brawl due to their rivalry. Neil, who was at the festival, threatened to stab Lee the next time they encountered each other. The following day, police arrested Neil and his friends for his threatening behavior. Luckily for Neil, a friend of his took the blame when a knife was found next to Neil's passport, claiming it was his. The friend, James Witham, was later arrested on suspicion of carrying a weapon, but despite the police involvement, tensions remained high following the Glastonbury incident. Ashley's life changed dramatically after that. The encounter with the gang left her feeling paranoid and fearful. Over the following weeks, her concerns about physical threats from Neil Berry grew. Not only had he threatened them during the festival, but he had also warned that he would show up at their home address. This terrifying prospect had a profound effect on Ashley, and she confided in her best friend. She expressed her anxiety in a text message, saying she can't stop thinking that something is wrong. As her anxiety grew, Ashley reached out to several friends for support. In another message, she described how distressing the situation had become and how it was affecting her mental health. Despite her efforts to calm herself, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was ahead. Unfortunately, her intuition was correct. On the evening of August 20th, 2022, Ashley posted a photo of herself relaxing on the couch, completely unaware of what would happen after dark. Then, her car alarm suddenly went off. It was her car, but she ignored it. Frustrated, she continued to enjoy the evening and texted a friend about the siren going off again, assuming it was because of the rain. The message seemed normal, but there was a paranoid undertone. That night, she sent another message saying, "She don't know, but it looks like someone is outside." Over time, Ashley's anxiety increased, and her car alarm went off again, reinforcing her belief that someone was outside and that something was seriously wrong. On the morning of August 21st, the doorbell rang, and Ashley sensed that it was bad news. The sound echoed through the quiet house, and suddenly, the door swung open, revealing an armed man standing in the doorway. He acted quickly, opening fire without giving her a chance to react. In a panic, Ashley grabbed her phone and ran out the back door. The attacker then moved throughout the house, shooting into several rooms in an attempt to find her, hoping she was hiding in the backyard. Ashley faced her final moments with extreme fear. She could not escape the violence or her fatal injuries, and the final text messages she sent just before the attack served as a haunting reminder of her awareness of the danger. Tragically, Ashley Dale was murdered, and many suspect that Lee Harrison's connection to gang activity contributed to her death. Police discovered that all of Ashley's tires had been slashed, likely due to the attacker's actions, which had set off her car alarm. Police believe this was a deliberate attempt to lure Ashley and Lee Harrison away from their home. When her family heard her last text message, they were devastated to realize that she had sensed something was seriously wrong. Fortunately, Ashley's text message contained vital information that would help solve her murder. Police now need to piece together the evidence. However, the investigation remains tense and complicated, especially because of her boyfriend, Lee Harrison. He happened to be absent during the shooting and was very unwilling to cooperate with the police, even refusing to testify. When he was brought in for questioning, he chose to remain silent, which hampered the investigation. He changed his mobile phone number and shunned Ashley's entire family, leaving them devastated. Lee's lack of empathy only increased concerns about his possible involvement in her death. Police were surprised to discover that shortly after Ashley's death, he had gone on holiday and left the country. This raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if he had done this to avoid prosecution. While he was on holiday, they focused on the events that took place on the night of August 20, 2022. Surveillance camera footage showed them entering a store. After making a purchase, they left and got into a gray Hyundai i3. This car later became key evidence, as another surveillance camera recorded it near Ashley's home earlier that day. Surveillance camera footage captured a car approaching Ashley's home, showing the driver surveying the area before the attack that evening. James Witham and Joseph Pierce approached Ashley's Volkswagen parked outside the family home and punctured the tires in order to set off the alarm. They attempted to lure Lee or Ashley out, but neither responded. Frustrated, they decided to retreat and come up with a new plan, which went badly wrong. An hour later, both men returned to Ashley's home, but this time one of them was armed, indicating their violent intentions. They broke into the house by forcing down the front door and saw Ashley running toward the back door. When she reached the garden door, James fired 8 shots from his pistol, hitting her in the back. After watching her fall, he went upstairs and fired 5 more shots into an empty bedroom, possibly as a threat. After a quick survey of the house and finding no one else inside, James quickly ran downstairs. Both James and Joseph then fled the scene. Fortunately, a neighbor's surveillance camera recorded the events that followed the attack. James and Joseph checked into a hotel in St. Helens to avoid detection. However, the police were able to track their movements and quickly located their car, leading to their arrest. Meanwhile, Neil Berry, who played a key role in organizing the attack, was spotted at a local golf club. Intelligence reports also indicated that he had been seen at a golf resort. The police worked together effectively to arrest him, and soon a fourth accomplice, Sean Zeiss, was arrested in connection with Ashley's murder. After the arrest and indictment of James Witham, Neil Berry, Sean Zeiss, and Joseph Pierce, the police gathered evidence, leading to the start of the trial. James Witham, who shot Ashley, initially claimed he did not intend to kill her. He argued that he intended to shoot her as a warning but accidentally hit her, asserting that her death was accidental. However, this defense was difficult to believe in court due to the overwhelming evidence, including previous threats, text messages, extensive surveillance camera footage, and numerous witness statements. When Ashley discovered that 2 armed men had broken into her home, she screamed in fear and tried to escape through the back door. James, who was armed, had time to aim. He fired 2 shots at Ashley, hitting her in the back as she tried to run away. It was clear that he had shot her intentionally. In November 2023, at Liverpool Crown Court, the judge sentenced James Witham, 41, Neil Berry, 26, Sean Zeiss, 28, and Joseph Pierce, 29, for murder, conspiracy to murder, and unlawful possession of a firearm. The four were sentenced to a total of 173 years in prison. James was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 43 years, Neil to life with the possibility of parole after 47 years, Joseph to life with the possibility of parole after 41 years, and Sean to life with the possibility of parole after 42 years. The sentencing of Ashley Dales for killers has left her family with mixed emotions. Although they feel that justice has been served, it can never replace the profound loss they have experienced. Ashley Dale's tragic death has left her family in a state of grief. Ashley's mother described the loss as life-changing. Adding to their grief, Ashley's younger brother was killed by the same gang. Her father lamented, "Ashley, the eldest of my 3 children, and my son are now both gone." Despite the loss, the family has become advocates against gang violence, working to unite the community and provide support through memorials for Ashley. Meanwhile, Ashley's boyfriend, Lee Harrison, has faced no consequences and remains at large. Even after his girlfriend was murdered, he continued to sell banned substance for profit. Gun violence in the UK is low, with one of the lowest gun-related homicide rates in the world. Despite a population increase since 2011, the average number of gun homicides in the UK remains at 29 per year. The level of gang violence in the UK has only increased in recent years, possibly due to poverty and lack of education. The situation in the gang world is not improving. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Pauline Zeil. On February 22, 1995, Pauline Zeil heard the verdict of the court for the crime she had committed. She was lucky to avoid the death penalty. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tears streamed down her face as she held the hand of her lawyer, seeking comfort despite her unfortunate outcome. She had avoided being placed in a cell with 5 other inmates on death row. Pauline Zeil was a devoted mother, working 2 jobs to support her children. From her first marriage, she had a daughter named Christina. With her second husband, John Zeil, she had 2 sons. Christina lived with her father's relatives in Maryland for a time and did not live with her mother. Many who knew Pauline considered her a good mother. Although she was abandoned by her mother and grew up in an orphanage, no one suspected that she could become a danger to society, especially to her own family. Christina lived with her grandmother, and they had a good relationship. However, just before a series of unfortunate events, her grandmother gave Christina to her mother in Florida. Because they had been separated for so long, Christina was not happy about this reunion. In June 1994, she lived in her mother's small 2-room apartment in Riviera Beach with her 2 younger brothers and John Zeil, her stepfather. John was indifferent to Christina, creating a tense family atmosphere. For months later, Christina's mother, Pauline, reported to the police that her daughter had been kidnapped. While in a crowded store, 7-year-old Christina went into the women's restroom and did not return. Pauline searched everywhere but could not find her. The police took her report seriously and began searching for Christina. During a television appearance, Pauline became emotional, begging for her daughter's safe return, but no one suspected that her feelings might not be sincere. As the police investigated, Pauline's family, friends, and acquaintances revealed that the couple often argued. The tension in the family was not only due to Christina's presence but also to Pauline's marriage to her second husband, John. They argued daily, and he was very controlling. He did not hesitate to resort to violence if things went wrong. Neighbors often heard their arguments, and he was also known to have abused Christina. The police speculated that Christina may have run away, feeling resentment toward her mother and stepfather, and sought comfort from her grandmother, where she had a happier childhood. They began to follow up on this line of investigation. The grandmother stated that she had not seen Christina since she returned her to her mother, although she missed her very much. Interviews with witnesses at a nearby store yielded no useful information. No one had seen a girl matching Christina's description that day, and there were no security cameras in the area. Despite a thorough search of the store, they found no trace of Christina. Then the police discovered a crucial clue: Pauline had sold her bicycle and a videotape. When asked about these items at Christina's school, her mother dismissed them, saying they were no longer needed. At the time, everyone was still hopeful that Christina was alive, but this new information was very disturbing. The police began to question whether Christina had actually been in the store that day and considered the possibility that Pauline's story was a lie intended to mislead the investigation. 2 weeks after Christina's disappearance, the police obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched the home where Christina lived with her mother. Unfortunately, these searches did not yield any useful information. They could not find any clues at the time. Pauline, the girl's mother and the last person to see her alive, became the prime suspect. However, the situation changed dramatically a few days later when Pauline went to the police in tears and confessed. She claimed that her husband, John, had beaten their daughter to death, but insisted it was an accident. Pauline provided a detailed account of Christina's final moments. A victim of domestic violence, she admitted to fabricating the kidnapping story to mislead the police. Her efforts to cover up the crime ultimately contributed to her long prison sentence. John Zile lived with his wife, Pauline, and their sons in a cramped apartment. They struggled financially, and the difficult living conditions may have contributed to negative feelings towards their daughter, Christina. On September 16, 1994, John lost control and beat Christina because she was dirty and had problems with urinary incontinence. Neighbors heard noises, including John's screams and Christina's cries, which sounded different from the typical cries of a child. They could hear muffled thumping, followed by Christina screaming louder. Eventually, the noise died down, but the mother begged John to stop. During the incident, Christina lost consciousness and began to convulse. John hit her hard enough to silence her and covered her mouth with his hand, causing her to choke. When things finally quieted down, neighbors could hear John's panicked voice. John and Pauline hid Christina's body in a closet for a week before moving it to a vacant lot behind a shopping center to bury it. Pauline agreed to reveal Christina's burial location. On October 27, Christina's body was found. She had multiple stab wounds. Forensic experts confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation. The child had suffocated while trying to cover her face with her hands. Police discovered that while the body was in the closet, the couple had prepared for the burial by purchasing items such as shovels, tarps, cleaning supplies, and other necessary tools. Pauline had acted cautiously. She took Christina's belongings, such as her bicycle and videotapes, to a pawn shop. She later admitted that she had done so to erase the memory of her daughter. However, the reality was simpler. She had used the money from the pawn to pay for the burial and clean the house. Pauline blamed her husband for their daughter's death, claiming that he was responsible for killing her. But later revelations changed the story. John claimed that Pauline never intervened when he was beating Christina. On the day he lost control and attacked Christina, he asked Pauline to call for help to save the girl while she was still alive, but Pauline refused to help their daughter. During questioning, Pauline admitted this. She believed that the girl could still be saved, but she was too afraid of facing the consequences of her actions to take her to the hospital. the police discovered that Christina had been abused many times before. Despite this, Pauline never intervened to stop the abuse. Even when Christina begged Pauline for help during John's attack, Pauline showed no interest. Pauline Zeil and John Zeil were later arrested and charged with child abuse and concealing evidence. Pauline, who has 2 sons, faced losing her parental rights. Realizing this during the first hearing, she voluntarily relinquished her rights to her sons through their attorney. A foster family took in the children. Pauline Zeil's trial began, during which she denied her guilt and blamed John for what had happened. Her lawyer argued that Christina's death